Chapter 57, Dumbledore's Gift. Non-existence? Beyond life and death? Ron's voice trembled with excitement. You mean Regulus? Surprisingly, Sirius didn't leap to his feet in outrage. He had to admit Ron was onto something. After all, Dumbledore had hinted that Regulus occupied a realm far removed from the living or the dead, and if any form of magical creature boasted remarkable longevity, it was the human wizard, as long as they cultivated a positive state of mind. Even the legendary vampires of Muggle lore couldn't match a contented wizard for years lived. In other words, as Lily always insisted, emotional health could be more powerful than any potion or charm. Sirius leaned forward. If that's true, Professor, what exactly sustains Regulus? You've said before that he lives on, maybe forever, but what is it he absorbs to keep from fading away? Dumbledore regarded him kindly. Ah, Sirius, I understand your question. Regulus is unlike anything else you've encountered. His very concept of existence and non-existence is unique. For one thing, he does possess something we could call life, a spark that poltergeists, dementors, or even boggarts utterly lack. And yet, though he resembles an Inferius in some ways, he isn't harmed by sunlight. He can, however, be destroyed by a sufficiently powerful fire spell. He paused, letting that sink in. Still, true non-existence cannot be completely erased. Regulus walks the line between being and nothingness, sustained by forces we're only beginning to understand. Albus Dumbledore sat behind his polished oak desk, steepling his long fingers as he considered the implications of Regulus's transformation. Beside him, Sirius Black frowned, trying to follow the headmaster's reasoning. First, Dumbledore began, wizards can only devise spells that repel Inferi, using positive emotion to block the corruption they'd otherwise spread. Second, although Regulus can no longer fly, these non-existences, he tapped the tabletop for emphasis, float with unnatural ease. Sirius leaned forward. But what of his lifespan? Does this creature still age? Dumbledore's eyes gleamed. He has transcended life as we know it. Regulus has become something far closer to the ideal of an Inferius, the pinnacle of black magic. No food, immortal, drawing strength from pure darkness. It's a novel kind of immortality, rather like the Phoenix's rebirth, only without the invulnerability. Sirius exchanged a startled look with the empty chair opposite. You're saying he's unkillable? In practical terms, yes. Dumbledore sighed, a hint of excitement softening his stern features. Which led me to a bold idea. Perhaps we should cultivate Regulus, shape him, so to speak. Think of it. Harry and Tom Riddle's diary Horcruxes hold one another in check, neutralizing each side's excesses, but 3 points form the sturdiest structure, the most reliable balance. Regulus is a blank slate, ready to be imbued with our own principles, a wizard genuinely bred in the philosophy of unity and light. He paused, drawing in a slow breath. His existence alone moves me more than any philosopher's stone ever could. Sirius cleared his throat. All right, Albus, I'm following, more or less. But, should we sell our stake in the cave? His voice trailed off uncertainly. Dumbledore allowed himself the tiniest, amused smile. I'm merely suggesting possibilities, Sirius. But yes, that might be the least of our concerns if Regulus truly stands with us. Picture this. Ron burst out, eyes sparkling with excitement. We find a dying wizard and set him in Voldemort's trap. If he survives, he'll emerge transformed, just like Regulus Black, and we'll collect a fortune. If he doesn't make it, well, he was already lost, so no one can accuse us of fraud. Besides, we have Dumbledore's endorsement, and Regulus himself, to lend credibility. And remember, the Dark Lord didn't confine his defenses to that island. He scattered wards all through the cave. Anyone daring enough to bypass us will be torn apart by those enchantments. They don't have Crache's guidance. In other words, Voldemort's own traps become our impregnable vault. A stunned silence fell. No one dared interrupt until Ron finally stopped speaking. In the dimmest corner of the room, an ancient wand flickered with a pale light, unnoticed amid the shock. Yet even that faint glow couldn't drown out the unspoken warning of the death god, Dumbledore's solemn caution in effect ignored. Immortality, he had said, lies beyond any wizard's art and is dangerously unstable. When you stretch a life unnaturally long, the tiniest flaw grows over the centuries into an unmanageable disaster. Draco Malfoy's lip curled in disdain. You'd traffic in such a devil's bargain? The Malfoys have dealt in many things, but never this. And tell me, Can you even replicate it reliably? One misstep, and instead of gold, we're left with an immortal monstrosity no one can control. Sirius fixed Harry with a solemn look. If you're truly determined to do this, then for my brother's safety, I'll have no choice but to bind myself to you with an unbreakable vow. Ron's gaze dropped to the floor, his expression guarded. Harry's heart pounded. Ron, that's Voldemort's domain we're talking about. What if something goes horribly wrong? Harry found himself torn. Though he shared Sirius and Draco's worries, his secret training with Ryan had opened his eyes to the miraculous potential of magic. In that light, Ron's suggestion wasn't sheer fantasy, just hopelessly premature. They needed first to defeat Voldemort. After all, Nicholas Flamel himself was not immortal. At that moment, Professor Dumbledore, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. He raised a gentle hand, and Harry sensed the headmaster reaching out not only with his wand, but with his profound understanding. "My dear children," Dumbledore began softly, "this is a boundary wizards were never meant to cross. Those who tamper with the essence of life risk finding life itself rebelling against them. Look at Regulus Black. His very survival was a miracle, yet not even a phoenix can grant true immortality." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Magic must be guided by wisdom and restraint. Dark arts that pursue everlasting life, Horcruxes among them, are roads we dare not travel. This lesson is woven deep into our own histories and families. Harry drew a steadying breath. Dumbledore had spoken not only to his mind, but to his unspoken fears. In the room's hushed aftermath, they all understood. No magic, however wondrous, was worth losing themselves in the pursuit of an impossible eternity. The bond between Albus Dumbledore and his phoenix ran deeper than most could see. It was as if every Dumbledore before him had sought the same prize, immortality, through that legendary creature. Albus himself knew better than to explore such a path. He understood, with uneasy clarity, that it was a road that ended in ruin, and that no good could come of passing down that forbidden legacy. With a faint glow at the tip of his ancient wand, he shook off the weight of the thought. "All right, everyone," he said abruptly, turning his attention away from the hearth. "Today is a special day, Harry's birthday." Remus Lupin, who'd been quietly eating his supper, looked up at once. His werewolf instincts, ever on alert, had caught the flicker of tension in Dumbledore's posture. He knew better than to leave that dark conversation unspoken and unsilenced. With a single, decisive nod, he shifted in his seat as if to draw a line under the subject. Dumbledore's eyes brightened. "I almost forgot," he murmured, tapping his wand against the table. In a swirl of silvery light, a small gleaming object hovered before Harry. The device was no larger than a pocket watch, sleek and perfectly polished. Harry reached out to catch it. "What is it?" Ron asked, leaning over. "A little invention of mine," Dumbledore replied, voice threaded with amusement. "I call it the light-off device. One simple flick, and it absorbs every lamp and candle in a room, leaving everything in perfect darkness. Flick it again, and the lights return exactly as they were." Harry turned the device over in his hand, eyes shining. Even Dumbledore's most ordinary gift carried a hint of enchantment, and, as always, a touch of the unexpected. Sirius turned the small device over in his hands, his brow furrowed. "A simple trinket? Hardly. The magic woven into this is unlike anything I've ever encountered." Harry hesitated, then asked quietly, "Professor Dumbledore, this really is from you?" Dumbledore's eyes danced behind his half-moon spectacles. "It is, and there's no need for formalities. Just speak your mind." Harry swallowed. I was thinking of giving it to Regulus." "Would that be all right?" Before Dumbledore could reply, Sirius shook his head. "No, Harry, this was meant for you. You should keep and use it yourself." Dumbledore nodded in agreement. "Indeed, this gift is yours, though it seems designed only to snuff out light wherever you choose. It's actually far more than a simple gadget. Think of it as a magical tome in mechanical form. Study its workings, learn its enchantments, and when you're ready, you can teach Sirius the spell or pass it on to Regulus yourself." Harry met Dumbledore's gaze, curiosity shining in his eyes. This was more than a light-absorbing device. It was a lesson waiting to be learned. Chapter 58, Devour, the Sun-Chasing Wolf. The D-Lighter looks like a simple alchemical gadget, just a shiny silver flask with a small absorbent core. In practice, however, it does far more than extinguish a flame. Once it draws in any light source, be it candlelight or electric bulb, it devours the very essence of that illumination. The absorbed light can never be reignited. It's gone for good. The delighter doesn't merely turn off lights. It consumes the concept of light itself, transcending all scientific explanation. Such an artifact can only exist through pure idealism, the kind of feat that only a wizard who grasps magic's deepest truths could achieve. Even in the original timeline, Scrimgeour, one of the most powerful wizards of his age, prized these devices as rare treasures. On their journey to track down the next Horcrux, Ron had ridden ahead of Harry and Hermione. The cursed locket they carried pressed dark thoughts onto his mind, and at last he could bear it no longer. He veered from the path and disappeared into the forest's shadowy edge. For a time, he walked in silence, until, without warning, Harry's voice whispered from the delighter at his belt, followed by Hermione's urgent tones. The two of them were miles away, yet their words reached him through this uncanny tool. Ron froze, heart pounding, as the delighter's silver surface seemed to pulse with their distant voices. In that moment, he realized this innocuous flask was far more powerful and sinister than he had ever imagined. Ron held the delighter in his palm and whispered its activation charm. Instantly, a glowing sphere of pale blue light, reminiscent of the aura around the door key, bloomed in midair. Before he could blink, the radiance coursed through him, filling his mind with a sudden clarity. He could sense Harry's exact position, even though he was kilometers away. Without hesitation, Ron apparated straight to that spot. The delighter did more than grant instantaneous travel. It also enabled its owner to hear the voice of the person they most missed, and to zero in on their location. There was one caveat, however: the longing had to be mutual, or the other person needed to utter the owner's name aloud. Ron recalled that in the previous timeline, he'd caught Harry and Hermione speaking about him only because Hermione had accidentally said his name. In that instant, his ears had burned with every word they exchanged. Frankly, Ryan never imagined Dumbledore would entrust Harry with such a device. But as I mulled it over, the delighter's search function struck me as eerily similar to the enchantment Voldemort once laid on his own name. Deep inside the delighter, the owner's name is inscribed in magical script. Whenever someone speaks that name, and the owner simultaneously thinks of that person, the device channels the speaker's voice and pinpoints their location, and the more genuine the affection behind the longing, the stronger the signal. In short, the delighter harnesses the bond of mutual yearning and positive emotion, transforming friendship into a beacon across any distance. In the original timeline, during Harry's 7th year at Hogwarts, Voldemort's own searchers wielded a strange device, very much like the one now in Harry's possession. That oddly shaped magical contraption would instantly betray anyone who dared speak the Dark Lord's name, no matter whether they did so in fear, defiance, or mere curiosity. It made no distinctions. The faintest whisper of Voldemort set its mechanism in motion and revealed the speaker's location within moments. Now, Dumbledore's Deluminator, a sleek silver instrument once engraved with Albus Dumbledore, had begun to change. Day by day, the headmaster's name dimmed away, until delicate letters spelling Harry Potter flickered into view. Watching this transformation, Ryan felt a growing curiosity. When would Harry discover the Deluminator's true power? It was clear that Dumbledore meant this artifact for more than simply storing light. The device, forged to record and transfer sparks of emotion, was in fact a bridge between hearts, a secret ladder toward greater strength that Harry had yet to climb. Summer slipped by swiftly, and September's approach reminded Harry that term was about to begin. He devoted every spare minute to exploring the Deluminator's hidden functions. Alone at first, he clicked its gently whirring dials, whispered names into the cool metal, and waited for whatever response the device might offer. Before long, Sirius Black, Harry's godfather, joined him, followed shortly by Remus Lupin. Together, they set hypotheses, ran experiments, and patiently unraveled one more whisper of the Deluminator's mysterious, heart-linking magic. Late one August night, in the shadowed halls of the Black family manor, Harry stood before Sirius Black and another seasoned member of the Order. With a determined flick, he raised his wand, and all along the walls, the candle flames leapt free, coalescing into glowing orbs that drifted toward Harry's wand and vanished inside. Sirius's eyes shone with excitement. "Now give it a name that captures its magic," he urged. Harry's pulse raced. "Light. Skio." "Skio," Sirius repeated with a grin. The moment Harry spoke the word, brilliant spheres shot from the tip of his wand, darting back to each candle holder and reigniting the flames. Ron staggered back. "Harry, you just invented a spell. What does it mean?" Draco shot Ron a mocking look. "You fool, don't go explaining it. You never reveal a spell's meaning, let alone its origin. The more people know, the easier it is to crack. Wizards guard their proudest creations and hide their secrets to keep them strong." Harry let out a breath, equal parts exhilarated and awed. Ron rubbed the back of his neck and offered a sheepish grin. "Sorry, I just got carried away." "No, I actually designed this spell for Sirius to pass on to Regulus," Harry explained, "so that he won't have to snuff and relight every single candle whenever he comes and goes." He looked around the common room, then continued, "The incantation, Shkalupengorgio, breaks down into 3 parts. First, Shkull, the name of the wolf in Norse myth who devours the sun. Since my spell absorbs light, that was an obvious reference. Next, Lupus, Latin for wolf, which makes clear that it's the wolf we mean. And finally, Engorgio, a variant of the Engorgio charm. It comes from Old French, meaning to swallow in the throat, later extended to devour voraciously. Put together, Shkalupengorgio literally evokes the wolf swallowing the sun, exactly what the spell does to light." Ron grinned. "You got it right on the first try, Harry." Sirius leaned back in his chair, astonished. "Harry, most wizards spend weeks, sometimes months, just coming up with a name for a new spell. You've done it in seconds. Most wizards can produce a dazzling effect with a flick of the wrist, but to forge a truly stable spell, to give it a proper name and a firm identity, takes far more than raw talent." Sirius had assumed Harry's incantation was nothing more than an off-the-cuff improvisation. He'd certainly never expected it to be as polished and precise as a finely honed charm from the Ministry's own grimoire. How could Harry have conceived such a perfect incantation on the spot? Ron's jaw dropped. He stared at Harry, eyes wider than the golden snitch after a good bludger hit. This wasn't simple improvisation. This was magic of the kind taught to 6th and 7th year students. Draco Malfoy, standing nearby, slapped his palm against his cheek just to make sure he wasn't dreaming. What few people realize is that the real challenge of learning, and more crucially of teaching, a spell lies in its name. A wholly new incantation, born without rhyme, reason, or explanation, can only be mastered by those with years of experience and persistence. But when a spell's name is perfectly crafted, meaningful, evocative, maybe even backed by a little story or clear instructions, then younger students can grasp it almost immediately. Add a set of precise wand movements, and even a first-year pill could cast it by simply reciting the words aloud. It was this rare combination of clarity, creativity, and structure that made Harry's spell so extraordinary, and left everyone watching shaking their heads in astonishment. Chapter 59, Ravenclaw's Traditional Study Method. Ron gaped at Harry in stunned silence. Harry only shrugged and gave him a faint smile. "Believe me, naming a magical phenomenon isn't the hardest part," he said. "The real challenge is breaking free from the rules you already know and learning to cast spells purely by instinct. Even the simplest command with the Deluminator took me ages to master." He paused, remembering the ritual he'd discovered in the ruins of Atlantis, the same one he'd used to analyze potion ingredients. To his surprise, it worked just as well on the Deluminator. "If it weren't for Sirius and Lupin helping me practice, I never would have picked it up so quickly," Harry admitted. And that's not even taking into account the magic of giving spells their true names. But there was more to the Deluminator than even Harry had first suspected. As he experimented, he felt a strange surge of power, something deep and unfathomable. For a heartbeat, he thought he heard Neville Longbottom's voice, distant but unmistakable. "Gran, Harry taught me this, and I'm definitely not seeing Harry and Ron the way Rita Skeeter said I was." The whisper faded almost instantly, swallowed by shadows. Harry's grin faded. "That voice? I'm not ready to explain it yet. There are secrets in the underwater wizarding world I need to keep under wraps." He turned away, slipping the deluminator into his pocket, its faint hum echoing the mysteries still to be unraveled. Harry hesitated, then continued. There's another source I nearly forgot, a rather obscure volume called The Evolution of Curses. Ryan showed it to me. It traces spells back to their linguistic roots and reveals their true meanings. Ron, you ought to read it, Harry said, meeting his friend's glare. It's useless, Ron shot back, cheeks flaming. To him, all this talk of word origins felt like academic fluff. Magic was about raw power, not fancy etymology. It works, Harry insisted. Once you grasp what a spell's name actually means, learning it becomes far easier. That's the Ravenclaw approach. Ron snorted. Sounds like more effort to me. Not at all, Harry replied calmly. Ravenclaws learn spells by understanding their essence, rather than just mimicking pronunciations or wand movements. That rote method, grinding through endless practice, that's more a Hufflepuff thing. At once, Sirius sat bolt upright, his eyes wide. Of course, he exclaimed. That's how some of the Muggle-born kids in my year could pick up spells so fast, even with heavy accents. I never would have guessed that the studious nerd I laughed at had figured out this trick. He didn't even know about it until he was old. He'd never learned as much as his own godson. Harry folded his arms, exasperated. But this method really depends on the individual. If you're not a bookworm, or if you pick up spells more naturally through practice, then it's not worth it. Most first-year students learn better face-to-face, so the Hogwarts professors don't recommend it. Sirius raised an eyebrow. Even Professor Flitwick? Harry nodded. He granted me a few extra points for explaining the theory behind a particular incantation, but that was it. He understood how the method worked, but he never promoted it at all. Ravenclaw House, where I first heard of it, it's practically never used there. Sirius shook his head. An unpopular old book, then. Exactly. Harry sighed, realizing that he'd meant to reassure Sirius, but was only highlighting the faults of the approach. It's very Ravenclaw, heavy on theory, but no one really wants to learn that way. If you have time to pore over dusty pages, you might as well be out fixing your pronunciation and practicing wand movements. At the edge of the common room, Ron looked up from his stew. Oh, come on, Harry. Don't knock it. That so-called dusty method is exactly why you managed to invent that new spell so quickly. Harry turned to him, hopeful. So, would you actually try learning like this? Ron scowled and shoved a forkful of potatoes around on his plate. Don't be daft. I'd sooner forget the whole thing. He groaned and leaned back. Now, anyone fancy a game of exploding snap? Chapter 4. A Spell for Ryan. Everyone in the courtyard burst into laughter. Everyone except Harry. Nearby, under the bright awnings of the newly opened Florin's cold drink shop, Ryan came to an abrupt halt. He'd accompanied Penello and Kate to London's Diagon Alley for a day of shopping, but now he stared, puzzled. Harry Potter stood a few paces away, his wand tip glowing as he murmured a single crisp incantation, Skio. Ryan's heart skipped. Why did that spell sound like his name? Kate nudged him. Ryan, are you all right? Penello, her eyes wide with curiosity, leaned in beside her. Ryan discreetly consulted his wand pad. A reporter had just streamed Harry's impromptu ward, a name-based charm directed squarely at him. It's nothing, Ryan said, forcing a casual smile. Harry just noticed me and threw a quick spell. Harry Potter? Penello squeaked. The Harry Potter? Last I heard, he wasn't exactly on friendly terms with boys. Ryan chuckled softly. There was no use explaining further, especially not here. In his gut, he knew why this mattered. It all tied back to Jason Custer, the perverse wizard whose twisted experiments had provided the raw power to transform Dudley Dursley into a wizard. Ryan himself was inexplicably woven into that dark equation, 3 times 5 times 2, as Custer's notes had chillingly outlined, and every strange event seemed to circle back to him. What did that incantation do anyway? Penello asked, her voice a whisper. Before Ryan could answer, he reached out, gently clasping her hand. A faint spark of magic danced between them as he softly pronounced the word again. Skio. Penello's brow furrowed. Skio, what does it mean? Ryan's lips curved into a wicked grin. That, my dear Penello, is for you to discover. Behind them, the chatter of Diagon Alley resumed, oblivious to the sudden gravity of the moment. But for Penello, Kate, and Ryan, nothing would ever feel quite normal again. The real adventure was only just beginning. Penelope tapped her chin thoughtfully. If it were Kate, She'd have Ryan cornered by now, demanding a full explanation, she muttered under her breath. Ryan flushed. Penelope had never been one for patience when it came to wordplay and arcane etymology. Let's see. Penelope whispered, scribbling in a small notebook she'd pulled from her robes. Lupus, Latin for wolf. If this is anything like the transfiguration-based snake summoning curse, we'd expect something like serpensortia. Serpens is snake. Ortis, from the Latin oriri, means to arise or be born. French sortir means to go out, so serpensortia literally brings forth snakes. By that logic, a wolf summoning spell should be lupisortia, but most modern wizarding spells draw on Norse myth for their names. She paused, tapping her quill against the paper. Sol? No, that's sun. Skull. That's one of the wolves that chases the sun in Norse legend, so perhaps something like Lupus Skull or Luck Skull. She sketched a rough outline of a wolf mid-leap, its jaws open toward a stylized sun. Ryan cleared his throat. Do you follow any of this? His voice sounded smaller than usual. He immediately regretted teasing Penelope. The way he'd impersonated Kate the past few days had made him forget just how ferociously enthusiastic Penelope got about puzzles. She looked up, eyes bright. I'm tracking you, she said quietly. Now, where does light come into it? Ryan let out a shaky breath and managed a grin. Well, and I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this spell is bound up with light itself. Penelope leaned forward, confidence shining in her eyes. Remember that Potter trained under you for a while? He always said Norse mythology was the perfect source. Its legends end cleanly, without messy loopholes. That's why this spell isn't really turning anyone into a wolf. It borrows the image of Skull, the wolf who chases and devours the sun. Instead of expelling sunlight, the magic temporarily swallows it, plunging everything into darkness. Kate frowned, trying to follow. So it doesn't banish the sun, it just absorbs its light? Exactly, Ryan agreed, wrinkling his nose at the thought. And it links directly to Regulus. He's more or less a living corpse now. Sunlight burns him. That makes sense, Kate murmured, nodding as she connected the dots. She paused, her gaze drifting to a terrarium tucked in the corner of the room. Speaking of which, why do you still keep snakes in your house? Ryan's lips curved into a mysterious smile. Those aren't snakes, he said softly. They're blood-cursed orcs, my latest research subjects. Chapter 60, Dark Earth Mother. A day after their mid-August journey, Ryan and Kate each returned to their own home, still unsettled by the mysteries they'd uncovered. Meanwhile, far from their minds, another story was stirring, one that stretched back centuries and spanned continents. Her name was Nagini. In ancient Hindu lore, a Naga or Nagian is a semi-divine serpent, and a Nagini specifically refers to the female of that race. Born in Indonesia, Nagini carried in her veins a powerful blood curse inherited from her mother, an enchantment that allowed her to shift seamlessly between human and snake. By rights, she should have remained hidden, a secret locked away from the prying eyes of wizards. But fate intervened. In her youth, Nagini was snatched by the infamous Arcanus Circus and forced to perform as one of its freak attractions. Amid the smoky tents and leering crowds, she first met Obscurus Creston, an ageless sorcerer whispered to descend from the legendary Dumbledore line. It was through Cresden's strange friendship that she later crossed paths with Newt Scamander, and most ominously, with Gellert Grindelwald himself. When Cresden finally fell, Nagini's will to live crumbled. The blood curse, long leashed by her own determination, surged to its full power. The result was tragic. She transformed irrevocably into a real serpent, her human memories washed away like footprints in the sand. Now, as the warm winds of late summer swept across the earth, Nagini lay coiled in the shadows, stripped of her past, driven only by the instincts of a creature forged in dark magic. And somewhere in the depths of that silent, slithering mind, the remnants of her human heart stirred. Chapter 7, The Serpent's Bond. Nagini slithered through the underbrush, her scales gleaming in the moonlight. At 12 feet long, she was unlike any ordinary serpent, a creature reborn by dark wizardry, gifted with uncanny wisdom, and a venom so potent it could slow the healing of any wound. She had none of her human memories, yet she possessed an intelligence far beyond that of a common snake. It was during one of her restless nights that she first encountered Lord Voldemort. In his second rise to power, the Dark Lord still had not fully recovered a corporeal form, but his mastery of Parseltongue remained flawless. Their meeting was inevitable, drawn together by the ancient bond of snake speech and hungry ambition. Voldemort admired Nagini at once, her size, her lethality, her rare mind, and recognized in her a powerful ally. Over time, Nagini became indispensable to him. In the years before his temporary body was restored, Voldemort brewed a sinister potion using her venom and stolen unicorn blood. This black concoction not only sustained his formless spirit, but amplified his strength, preparing him for the dark rituals ahead. Then came the summer after Harry Potter's third year at Hogwarts. Voldemort orchestrated the death of Frank Bryce, the Muggle caretaker of the Riddle House, and through that tragic murder, he forged Nagini into his final living Horcrux. From that moment on, her life force was bound to his own. As long as she lived, so would he. No mere guardian, she was the beating heart of his survival. Nagini's role extended far beyond that of a loyal companion. She was the venom that had once tempted Voldemort to abandon the Philosopher's Stone, the vital ingredient in his fledgling body, and now the guardian of his soul's deepest fragment. In every scaled coil, she embodied his darkest desire for immortality. Word of Tom Riddle's diary, his first Horcrux, had spread ever since Professor Dumbledore publicized its existence. Voldemort, no stranger to gossip among his followers, would soon learn that the diary had resurfaced, awakened by forces neither he nor his snake had fully anticipated. Yet whatever threats lay ahead, Nagini remained, coiled and watchful, the silent sentinel of Voldemort's undying will. Ryan had kidnapped Nagini, once a gentle witch, now trapped in the form of a serpent and banished to the remote Mounta in forests. She hadn't seen Voldemort in nearly 11 years. Ryan's motive wasn't cruelty, but caution. He refused to let the Dark Lord's schemes derail his meticulously planned second year at Hogwarts. All summer long, he'd prepared to ensure the next term would run smoothly. Besides, recent rumors of a youth version of Voldemort had already dulled any thrill of surprise. What truly intrigued Ryan was the legend of the Blood Curse, an ancient hex that neither Dumbledore nor Voldemort could lift. What secrets lay hidden in its entwined magic? He was determined to find out, and confident he could succeed where the greatest wizards had failed. His mind raced with possibilities as the carriage rattled along. Beside him, Penelo leaned forward, her eyes wide. "Blood curse?" she whispered, voice tight. "Did you really say blood curse? The only living carriers today are the women of the Holy 28's Greengrass family. That curse only clings to female blood, so does this mean Nagini was once a woman?" Ryan pressed a hand to his forehead, banishing the swirl of memories. He exhaled, steadying himself. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to unravel the ancient curse once and for all. Kate sat in the corner of Florin's cold drink shop, mechanically spooning chocolate nut sundae as if she were a brick wall, completely impervious to Penelope's questions. She knew better than to think the interrogation would end in under 10 minutes. Penelope, on the other hand, leaned forward eagerly. "So, her name is Nagini?" Ryan ran a hand through his hair. "Yes, Nagini." Penelope's eyes lit up. "But the blood curse only affects women, right?" "Exactly," Ryan replied. He glanced at Kate, hoping Penelope might pipe down. No such luck. "Here's the real kicker. Nagini has already gone up against 2 Dark Lords, and even Dumbledore himself tried to break her curse. None of them succeeded. That's why I'm so determined to study it." Penelope tapped her chin thoughtfully. "Which means we don't know anything about her. Personality, appearance?" Ryan shook his head. "The official files are fragmentary. No portrait, no personality profiles, just scattered rumors." Penelope's gentle face broke into a delighted grin. "I bet she's beautiful and dangerous. Who else could survive the wrath of 2 Dark Lords and live to tell the tale?" Kate's spoon froze midair. At those words, she finally sat up straight. "If she's as formidable as you say, then finding Nagini has just become our top priority." "Wait, aren't you curious why the blood curse afflicts only women?" Ryan asked, his voice quick and sharp. "I'm not," Kate snapped, leaping to her feet. But Penelope, ever ravenous for knowledge, leaned forward. A true Ravenclaw, she simply couldn't resist. "Kate, hold on. I want to hear this. You can fire your questions later." Ryan's lips curved into a faint smile. "Have you heard of Lord Shiva? Is this about Indian mythology?" Penelope asked, already flipping open her notebook and adjusting her quill. In her time traveling with Ryan, she had learned many astonishing things, chief among them that the gods were neither the clueless superstitions of muggles nor merely powerful wizards in disguise. Their powers and lifespans truly justified the title of deities. Shiva's consort, Ryan explained, is the goddess Shakti, the divine feminine without whom Shiva remains incomplete. You might know her incarnations, first as Sati, then reborn as Parvati. These earthly forms are simply Shakti's descents from the heavens, and it is through Parvati who, like Shiva, has undergone countless incarnations that the blood curse originated. Penelope's quill flew across the page, her eyes bright with fascination. When Ryan finally traced the blood curse to its source, even he was stunned. This wasn't a run-of-the-mill hex. It was a personal malediction from one of the trinity of Hindu gods. At first, he thought of Parvati, or one of her avatars. But Parvati rarely unleashed curses at random, and Durga, her warrior form, stood for righteous strength, not wanton slaughter. The only culprit left was Kali. Penelope's voice quivered as she laid out her theory. It has to be Kali, the Dark Mother Earth. Imagine her with skin as black as night, an emerald-green face framed by fangs, a third eye blazing like Shiva's, 4 arms brandishing weapons, and a necklace of snakes and human skulls. Even her tongue drips with blood. Ryan's heart pounded at the realization. This was no mere power to be wielded. It was a blood-bound inheritance bearing Kali's savage imprint, and only women could inherit it. Every witch who had succumbed to the curse, who lost her form or even her humanity, had been too frail to withstand the wrath of a deity. He exhaled a long, weary sigh, the weight of that truth settling over him. Chapter 7. The Serpent's Legacy. It was late August, one day after the calendar had tipped past mid-month, when Ryan and Kate finally returned home from their summer travels. Unbeknownst to them, halfway around the globe, another life was stirring from the shadows, the life of Nagini. Her name alone carried the weight of ancient legend. In Hindu lore, a Nagini is a half-human, half-serpent deity who can slip between forms at will. The name suited her perfectly. Born in the dense jungles of Indonesia, she inherited a potent blood curse from her mother, a curse that let her transform freely into both human and snake. And yet, by all rights, she should never have crossed paths with Ryan, nor should she ever have been captured. But destiny had other plans. Long before she ever met the Dark Lord known as Voldemort, Nagini's world darkened when 2 notorious wizards, true Dark Lords in their own right, entered her life. As a child, she was seized by the Arcanist Circus, condemned to perform as one of their freaks, a living oddity whose serpentine metamorphoses astounded and horrified the crowds. Among the tents and torches she encountered Creston, the youngest known obscurus in magical history. Rumor whispered that he was somehow tied to the Dumbledore family, though no one ever spoke of it in front of him. Through Creston, Nagini's path crossed with 2 more extraordinary figures, Newt Scamander, whose quiet kindness left a lasting impression, and the charismatic Gellert Grindelwald, who recognized power in her curse and promised her freedom. But nothing could prepare her for the moment Creston died in her arms. In the wake of his death, her will to live drained away. The blood curse she'd once mastered surged uncontrollably, and she lost herself in the skin of a serpent, cold, fanged, and mute. Her human memories slipped through her mind like water through her scales. Years later, still bound to her serpentine form and wandering the far reaches of the world, she encountered the Dark Lord Voldemort. His voice, uttered in hissing Parseltongue, stirred something deep within her, an echo of the woman she had been. He called her Nagini and offered her something she had long forgotten, belonging. And so, as Ryan and Kate settled back into their own lives, a darker undercurrent was already rippling through the wizarding world. Nagini, once a reluctant spectacle, was about to step onto a far grander stage, one that would draw together all the threads of her past, from the relentless blood curse to the lords of darkness who shaped her fate. The serpent story was far from over. Because she was a snake transformed by a dark wizard, Nagini represented something entirely new in the magical world. Stretching 12 feet from head to tail, her venom carried a rare property. It severely slowed the body's natural healing. Beyond that, she possessed a depth of wisdom no ordinary serpent could claim, though it held no trace of her former human memories. These extraordinary traits quickly earned her Lord Voldemort's favor. In the original timeline, Voldemort harvested Nagini's venom and blended it with unicorn blood to brew a powerful dark potion. He drank this elixir to sustain a temporary physical form and amplify his strength. Then, the summer after Harry Potter's third year, Voldemort murdered Frank Bryce, the elderly Muggle caretaker of the Riddle House, and used the tragedy to turn Nagini into what he considered his ultimate living Horcrux. In her very being, he would share an unbreakable bond of immortality. Having abandoned his pursuit of the Philosopher's Stone, Voldemort came to rely on Nagini's venom as the essential ingredient for re-incubating a new body. She quickly became one of his most powerful allies and a creature of paramount importance in his plans. With Tom Riddle's diary now freed into a separate sentient form, Voldemort must have learned of its existence once Professor Dumbledore publicly revealed its connection to him. Ryan leaned against the rough stone wall of the cavern, watching Nagini pace through the dim lamplight. She hadn't seen her master in nearly 11 years, since Voldemort had ordered her to hide away in that misty mountain forest, and yet the old power still simmered beneath her scales. Once, she'd been a respected witch. Now she was a weapon, feared by even the darkest wizards. He'd taken her precisely because he didn't want Voldemort or anyone else to disrupt his final year at school. Ryan had grand plans for next term: quiet afternoons in the library, friendly Quidditch matches, and no Dark Lords crashing into his peaceful routine. He was determined to keep his second-year trouble-free. But of course, surprises had a knack for finding him. A teenage Voldemort was one thing, but the whispers about Nagini's so-called blood curse were another. Neither Dumbledore nor Voldemort had been able to break it, and that only made Ryan all the more intrigued. What secret lay bound up in that ancient hex? And if anyone could unravel it, he believed it was himself. Pinello, standing just behind him, caught the name Blood Curse, and his face went pale. Blood Curse? He echoed. Did you really say that? As far as I know, the only family carrying such a curse today is the Greengrass line, and it only affects women. Was Nagini even human when this happened? Was she female back then? Ryan closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose, shaking off the swirl of memories. He had questions, countless questions, but first he had to find out just how far this curse would reach. Ryan shifted uneasily on the bench. He knew Kate could ask questions all day. Her queries were harmless enough, but Penelope was another story. Her curiosity was insatiable. Across from him, Penelope sat forward, eyes bright with anticipation. And Kate lounged at Florin's cafe counter, spooning chocolate nut sundae into her mouth. The little shop felt like an iron vault, sealing them off from the rest of the world. After a breath, Ryan spoke. You want to know who carries the blood curse? Her name is Nagini. Penelope's eyes widened. Nagini? So the curse really is tied to a woman? Ryan nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. Yes, only a woman can bear it. A triumphant smile curved Penelope's lips. That explains all the whispering I've heard. She tapped her chin. But you're holding back. What else aren't you telling us? Kate glanced up from her ice cream. Yeah, what's the whole story? Ryan gave a rueful shrug. Nagini's not just any bearer of a curse. She's crossed paths with 2 Dark Lords, and even Dumbledore tried and failed to lift it. That's why I'm so determined to study it. No one has found a cure. Penelope's detective instincts flared. 2 Dark Lords and Dumbledore? Wow, you really weren't kidding about its power. Ryan sank back, stirring his iced drink. Exactly. It's more dangerous and fascinating than anyone realized. Kate set down her spoon. So what now? How do we free her? Ryan met their gazes steadily. First, we learn everything we can about the curse. Then, we find a way to break it, without drawing any more dark attention. Penelope's grin returned, sharper this time. Challenge accepted. And as the 3 of them plotted their next move, Florin's cafe remained silent, but for the hiss of the cooler, a brief calm before the storm. Kate paused mid-lick of her ice cream, her eyes brightening. Hold on, aren't you at least a bit curious why the blood curse only affects women? Ryan asked, his tone urgent. I'm not curious. Kate jumped to her feet, her denial coming faster than she'd intended. But Penelope leaned forward, eager. As a true Ravenclaw, she thrived on obscure knowledge. Kate, hang on, I want to hear this first. You can fill me in on everything else later. Ryan's mouth curved into a small, knowing smile. Have you ever heard of Lord Shiva? Isn't that Indian mythology? Penelope murmured, pulling out her notebook and poised pen. Over the months she'd been dating Ryan, she'd learned that gods were neither ignorant Muggle legends nor merely powerful wizards. Their strength and lifespans placed them on a completely different plane of existence. Shiva's true counterpart is the goddess Shakti, his divine feminine half, Ryan continued. In her first incarnation, she was Sati. Reborn, she became Parvati. Both Sati and Parvati are simply manifestations of Shakti descending into the mortal world, and it's from Parvati that the blood curse originates. She shares as many forms as Shiva himself. Penelope scribbled furiously, while Kate, ice cream forgotten, stared in stunned fascination. Penelope's eyes went wide as she traced the swirling runes on the ancient altar. "This isn't just any curse," she murmured. "It's a blood bond, divine power, not mere black magic, and its signature matches one of the greatest deities of the Hindu pantheon." Ryan leaned in, frowning. "Shiva? Or maybe Parvati in one of her forms?" Penelope shook her head. "Parvati's other avatars, like Durga, are forces of righteous strength. This is darker. Look at the iconography carved here. A fierce goddess with 4 arms clutching weapons, snakes and skulls draped around her, blood dripping from her lolling tongue, a third eye burning in her forehead. Only Kali fits that description." Ryan's shock was palpable. Kali, the Black Earth Mother, but this curse, it's almost like granting her power to whoever bears it. "Exactly," Penelope said, tapping a glyph that pulsed crimson. "It's more of an inheritance than a hex, and legend says only women can channel it. Any witch who's tried and failed, either died or lost her humanity, simply couldn't withstand the goddess's wrath." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, staring at the blood-red glow. "So we're dealing with Kali's own essence, bound by blood. No wonder it's tearing people apart from the inside." Penelope nodded grimly. "We need to find a way to sever that bond before anyone else becomes its next victim." Chapter 61, Blessing. The power of the gods often proves more curse than gift to wizards of the modern age. Take Parvati, incarnation of the goddess Shakti's gentle nurture, known throughout India as the Lady of the Snow Mountain, yet she has woven a bloodline curse of astonishing cruelty. And strangely, that very curse is also a gift. In Britain, the so-called death god channels his power through enchanted objects. In India, however, deities favor blessings, divine endowments engraved directly upon the body. These blessings merge godly might with mortal souls, creating wizards who are no longer mere mortals. Consider Nagini's blessing. She can transform at will into a sleek, serpent-like magical creature of her own design, an accomplishment no animagus could rival. Or look to House Greengrass, one of the 28 sacred houses. Their ancestral blood curse ensures that every daughter born carries genuine witchcraft, and none ever fail to manifest it. Wizards, after all, are living embodiments of the divine, and so the Greengrass curse is as potent as it is lethal. It claimed Astoria Greengrass, wife of Draco Malfoy, as its latest victim. In the original timeline, she died without warning in August 2019, just 2 years after sending her son, Scorpius, off to Hogwarts in perfect health. She was only 37. The devastation of the blood curse was undeniable. Ryan couldn't shake the suspicion that Voldemort's leap to level 6, his near-divine power, was somehow bound up with the curse afflicting Nagini. After all, Voldemort's magic was already growing unnervingly serpentine in nature, and when Peter Pettigrew, Wormtail, returned to his side, Voldemort didn't hesitate to incorporate Nagini's blood into his ritual of rebirth. Given how squeamish the Dark Lord usually was about experimentation, how he lacked both the stamina and the rare ingredients for full-scale potion work, it seemed far too simple for him to ignore such a resource. The only reasonable conclusion was that Voldemort tapped directly into the dark, primal magic coiled within that blood curse, a sliver of Earth Mother divinity, raw and godlike. It was the kind of arcane power that could well have pushed him past every known magical limit. In hindsight, it all made perfect sense why the Dark Lord cherished Nagini so fiercely, and why he was willing to let her serve as a living Horcrux. Because even a wizard, no matter how formidable, could still ride the back of a god. Penelope paused mid-sketch and flipped her notebook to the draft page she'd been scribbling on. If they're the strongest of the first-generation wizards, Nagini and even the Greengrass witches, why can't they handle the blessing? Ryan set his quill down and regarded her thoughtfully. Because at their core, they're still merely wizards. That blessing, the power to transform, to cast extraordinary magic, places a constant strain on their very nature. Penelope looked puzzled. So Nagini's long lifespan in human form depends on how often she shifts into a snake, and those greengrass witches, if they never used magic, would just die of old age? Exactly, Ryan replied. Nagini could age and pass on like any mortal if she resisted her serpentine transformations. The greengrass line, overusing their powers, typically collapses in middle age. Their wizarding essence can barely sustain the blessing, and each use chips away at their life force. He leaned forward. They live on borrowed strength. The more they lean into the blessing, becoming snakes, weaving complex spells, the faster it corrodes their wizard souls until they finally fall. Penelope's pen flew across the page. Wait, so Nagini survived 2 Dark Lords and even faced Dumbledore. Is that why you called them demigods? Ryan met her gaze. That's the crucial point you caught. Their encounters with power far beyond ordinary wizarding, dark or light, elevate them almost to mythic status. But it's a Faustian bargain. The greater their feats, the sooner the blessing devours them from within. Penelope studied her notes, frowning. Era of a blood curse this potent was already rare, let alone one said to be a gift from a godlike wizard. And the name Nagini carried unmistakable Indian overtones. In parts of the subcontinent, it was even worshipped as divine. Such a curse should be priceless. Surely Grindelwald, Dumbledore, or even Voldemort would have pursued it relentlessly. You really thought they'd come after her for that? Ryan asked, a knowing smile tugging at his lips. Penelope's cheeks flared with annoyance. Of course, why else would they have overlooked something of this magnitude? Ryan shook his head. No, wrong. Or at least, not completely right. She bristled, but the corners of his mouth lifted in amusement. Everyone had assumed that Grindelwald and Dumbledore would recognize Nagini's extraordinary enchantment at once. In truth, neither did. Both men attained the 6th circle of wizarding through their own prodigious gifts and unshakable convictions, and through the blood alliance they forged with each other. 2 of the most powerful wizards in history, bound by fierce love, yet repelled by equal fear, yearning for intimacy, yet terrified of the wounds that closeness might bring. That contradiction, woven together with their raw talent, transformed a simple vow, a binding charm sworn never to harm one another, into a covenant of unprecedented power born from the crucible of their epic battle. Magic fused with a soul that refuses to form bonds can still share perceptions, yet remain utterly sealed off. That paradox is the source of their strength, a miracle destined never to be replicated. Ryan sighed softly. This, he said, is love. I doubt even Dumbledore would credit Grindelwald with reaching level 6 through love. His was a cruel, impure passion. That's why he fell to Dumbledore, a wizard whose faith in love was true and unshakable. Penelope tilted her head, frowning. But why did they draw near Nagini? If I'm not entirely off base, does Voldemort exploit the same principle? Kate's lips curved into an exasperated pout. A longtime admirer of Dumbledore, she was eager for more whispered truths about the rivalry between the 2 great wizards. So it wasn't just Grindelwald and Dumbledore who tangled with Nagini, it had to do with someone else. Credence Barebone, or Aurelius Dumbledore. Ryan nodded, his tone measured. At last, Kate's wide brown eyes brightened with anticipation. Gossip at last. Aurelius Dumbledore? Is he Albus's secret son, or another brother? After all, we know he did have a younger sibling. Ryan's expression darkened as he continued. He also had an aunt named Honoria, he said, forcing a wry smile. Lane never let him forget it, always teasing him with references to Horclapp's sinister appearance. Kate winced. The memory of Aunt Dumbledore's fiancé poking fun at that little pink, spiky, mushroom-like creature made her shudder with disgust. Ryan pressed on. But there's something even more remarkable. Creston is one of the most powerful obscurials in recorded history, and he's lived longer than any other. Grindelwald sees him as the perfect instrument, either to overthrow Muggle society or even to rival Albus Dumbledore himself. He paused as if weighing his next words. Of course, Dumbledore has taken a very different view. He's determined to guide Creston, to help him control his volatile magic before it destroys him. It's no secret that an obscurial's power is inherently unstable. That's why so many die young. Ryan's lips curved into a subtle, knowing smile. And that instability is precisely why both Dumbledore and Grindelwald have overlooked Nagini, the so-called blood-cursed orc. She looks perfectly ordinary, just another face in the crowd. In their eyes, she's nothing more than Creston's companion and friend. Chapter 63. Molly Weasley's Letter. Rita Skeeter made a shrewd decision by turning her attention to the parents of second-year students. After all, most of the books first years buy at Hogwarts will still be in use well into their later years, some even through year 7. In fact, aside from one new title, second years only need standard spells, level 2, which means families needn't budget so heavily for textbooks that term. Consider Bathilda Bagshot's History of Magic. Purchased in first year, it remains the core text for History of Magic classes all the way through to NEUT level. Likewise, Adalbert Waffling's Theory of Magic continues to serve in every course involving wand work. Felida Ball's 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi stays on the syllabus from first-year herbology onward, with the Carnivorous Tree Encyclopedia added in year 6. And of course, Newt Scamander's Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them stays required reading until graduation. By zeroing in on these enduring expenses, Rita knew she'd hooked her audience. After all, once you've opened your wallet in year 1, you're not done paying it off until you leave Hogwarts. Though officially required only in third year, students are encouraged to acquire this textbook early, since its material crops up in other classes. For instance, Potions often calls for various magical creature organs, and Defense Against the Dark Arts assigns Quentin Trimble's Dark Powers, a guide to self-defense well before third year. In fact, Potions boasts the most extensive reading list of all subjects. Alongside Arsene Giger's Magic Pharmacy and Potion, used from 3rd through 5th year, students must also study 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi. Meanwhile, Transfiguration relies on Emery Switch's Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration during 1st and 2nd years. Raising a wry smile, Ryan understood exactly why Rita Skeeter's criticism had resonated. Whenever a new professor, especially one without an established reputation, adds an extra required text, parents bristle at the sudden expense. After all, even someone as celebrated as Gilderoy Lockhart faced backlash when he insisted every student purchase all 7 of his self-written volumes. Famously, the Weasleys had to make an urgent trip to Gringotts just to cover those unexpected costs. Molly Weasley sank into her armchair, a stack of parchment, receipts, and shopping lists spilling across her lap. With 5 children still at Hogwarts, the family budget was stretched to its limits. This term alone, they needed 35 new volumes by Gilderoy Lockhart. Lockhart's books weren't exactly bargain basement, and even the most devoted fan of his, Molly herself, couldn't help but whimper at the total. She tapped her quill against the latest invoice. The real culprit, it seemed, was the Defense Against the Dark Arts class. Every year brought a new professor, and along with each new instructor came a fresh list of required texts. Despite the subject's notorious curse, it had once been one of the most lucrative courses in the curriculum. Professors, eager for extra income, routinely mandated supplemental readings, and families forked over sickles without question. A bit of risk was nothing compared to a fat paycheck. There were exceptions, of course. Quirinus Quirrell, who'd met his end at the school's gates, never imposed extra expenses. He claimed he wasn't interested in lining his pockets. Gilderoy Lockhart himself had followed a similar pattern during his tenure, until his greed got the better of him. Remus Lupin refused to add any new texts, likely because he couldn't secure a favorable deal, or perhaps because his modest teaching salary simply wouldn't stretch that far. And Alastor Mad-Eye Moody, along with his impostor, Bartemius Crouch Jr., viewed textbooks as unnecessary, mocking them as nothing more than dusty doorstops. So when Moody held the post, Weasley parents breathed a small sigh of relief. But this term, with yet another new face at the front of the classroom, the endless cycle of book orders had begun anew. And Molly's purse felt decidedly emptier. Professor Dolores Jane Umbridge, the least popular Defense the Dark Arts instructor Hogwarts has ever seen, has selected Magical Defense Theory as this year's textbook. The choice serves 2 purposes. It will line the ministry's pockets and, more importantly, keep unruly students in line, at least in the ministry's eyes. Magical defense theory was written by the pacifist scholar Wilbert Slinka, who insists on strictly passive methods for resolving conflict. He forbids the use of any offensive spells, even when they might serve a defensive purpose. In its philosophy, the book echoes the non-resistance stance of a well-known figure from the Muggle world. By contrast, when Severus Snape held the Defense Against the Dark Arts post, he chose encounter with the faceless monster, not because it was lucrative, but because he believed students needed a clear-eyed look at real threats. And in the original timeline's 7th year, Amicus Caro, the Death Eater who filled the same post, didn't bother with textbooks at all. His lessons became exercises in punishment and the instruction of dangerously dark spells. Looking back over the years, most Defense Against the Dark Arts professors, excluding the more unorthodox ones, have opted for newly published texts. Umbridge's choice, however, seems tailored as much to political control as to practical teaching. Ryan wasn't the least bit surprised when Voldemort announced his choice for the new Defense Against the Dark Arts textbook. It only made sense that the Dark Lord would select a volume that matched his own teaching philosophy. What intrigued Ryan, though, was how quickly that volume had appeared. Less than a month ago, he'd learned, thanks to an overheard conversation between a younger Voldemort and Dumbledore, just how little Tom Riddle knew of the Muggle world. And yet now, under its author's name, sat a brand new book entitled Magic in the Muggle World, already required reading at Hogwarts. Ordinarily, anything about Muggles would fall under the remit of Muggle studies. For Voldemort to repurpose it for dark arts instruction could only mean the content ventured far beyond daily life. So far, in fact, that the Department of Mysteries at the Ministry of Magic had taken notice. Their analysts had quietly issued a statement. They might bow before Voldemort's iron rule, but they recognized that this book contained ideas so radical they threatened to upend the entire wizarding worldview. Rumor hinted at chapters on rockets soaring into the sky, lunar landings, even the physics of outer space, topics no witch or wizard had ever been encouraged to explore. What exactly lay between those pages? The question burned in Ryan's mind, sharper than any hex. With every beating of his heart, his impatience grew. He could wait no longer. Ryan hustled Penelope and Kate down Diagon Alley to their last stop of the day, Flourish and Blots. Kate stabbed a finger at her shopping list. Okay, so who's the mystery student's parent? I don't care about that new dark arts manual. Voldemort or whoever wrote it can keep it. Give me the real gossip. Ryan just grinned, the sort of smile that said he knew more than he was letting on. Word is, it's Molly Weasley. Kate blinked. Molly Weasley? On Dumbledore's side? And for a single book, well, wouldn't she only need, 5 copies for her kids? He shrugged. That's what I heard. Kate shook her head, trying to make sense of it. Molly had been one of Gilderoy Lockhart's biggest fans back in the day. He'd practically been her hero until he ended up in Azkaban. No wonder she might feel a twinge of rivalry toward any new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor who dared fill Lockhart's old position. Yet Kate also knew Molly wouldn't dare send a complaint letter. This new instructor clearly had Dumbledore's blessing. Still, Sirius had let a key detail slip. The so-called new teaching materials had been rushed into print in under a month. That, Kate realized with a smirk, was the real reason Molly was so quietly and furiously upset. Ryan shook his head, torn between laughter and tears. Molly Weasley was the epitome of a traditional wizarding matriarch. She firmly believed that all her children belonged at the Ministry of Magic. Yet for all her strict expectations, she was utterly helpless when it came to their education. That was her true Achilles heel. Chapter 64. Knockdown Alley. The sun was dipping low, painting the cobblestones in warm golden hues. Straggling wizards with shopping sacks hurried homeward as dusk settled over Knockturn Alley. Penelope stood by a shuttered storefront, her honey-blonde ringlets catching the last rays of light while a rosy flush spread across her cheeks. She was utterly absorbed in that eerie ghost story she'd found. Kate, on the other hand, was practically vibrating with impatience. She seized Ryan's arm and gave it a hopeful tug. "Ryan, let's go," she urged. "If we don't leave soon, Penelope is going to be so lost in that book that we'll be stumbling around here long after dark." Ryan glanced down at her with mild amusement. Kate's eyes flicked from him back to Penelope, recalling the time he'd whisked them off to Albania with nothing more than a flick of his wand and a ripple in the air he'd called a dimensional wall. Surely he wouldn't launch into interspatial travel just to skip a walk down a nearly deserted alley, but Ryan merely shook his head. Though his denial was soft, it was firm enough to deepen Kate's pout. As the wizarding world's busiest bazaar, Diagon Alley throbbed with business by day, but at nightfall, most shops snapped their shutters shut, leaving only the lanterns around the leaky cauldron to cast any real glow. Kate crossed her arms in mock protest. "Fine," she muttered. "We'll walk, but I still think we should have left an hour ago." A faint smile tugged at Ryan's lips as he fell into step beside her. The last of the daylight faded, and the alley's yellow glow cobbles stretched ahead of them, quiet and waiting. Late at night, the only place still alight on Charing Cross Road is the leaky cauldron. Its glow spills onto the narrow cobblestone entrance of Nocturne Alley, that shadowy spine branching off from Diagon Alley. Here, under the cloak of darkness, warlocks and witches, some notorious, some merely curious, have long haggled over forbidden curios and contraband brooms. But things have changed since Ryan arrived to sweep Nocturne Alley. The once rampant dark wizards, especially those who preyed on innocents, have all but disappeared. Even Borgin and Burke, whose shop once specialized in cursed relics, has expanded into side streets previously ruled by more sinister hands. Their latest venture, pirated goods from the so-called Skywalker Alchemy Workshop, has turned Nocturne Alley into a sprawling midnight flea market. Banned potions, dark artifacts, and illicit spellbooks now trade hands beneath flickering lanterns, all but ignored by the Ministry. Cornelius Fudge, recently returned from his inexplicable disappearance, during which the Ministry's own efficiency quietly improved, claims all this progress as his doing. Convinced that credit belongs to him, he's taken to organizing covert patrols, only to turn up, bizarrely, stark naked on the outskirts of London. Undeterred, he's even attempted to order Nocturne Alley closed, but without proof of wrongdoing to back his demands, the witch and wizard world simply shrugs him off. The leaky cauldron still hums with late-night laughter, and the alley beyond still thrives, trading in its peculiar brand of magic long after the sun has set. Chapter Tech's Nocturne Alley has always been the cash cow of the pure-blood aristocracy, and its sudden, unexplained whitewashing has only made it more significant. Unsurprisingly, Cornelius Fudge blames it all on Albus Dumbledore. In Fudge's view, Dumbledore's towering reputation undermines every Ministry decree. Once again, the minister has been huddled up with his dutiful dog-headed advisor, Dolores Umbridge, plotting to discredit Dumbledore and restore his own tarnished authority. In a rare moment of grudging praise, Fudge even told reporters from the Daily Prophet that the new defense against the dark arts professor isn't half bad. Ryan, who has been quietly observing these power plays, can only hope that Fudge and Umbridge don't find themselves in Azkaban, especially not before Voldemort returns to settle old scores. T. Ryan also sees another possibility. Since Fudge's two inexplicable disappearances, the Ministry has functioned more smoothly without him. His hollow strategy, pretending to wield Dumbledore's prestige as his own, has worn thin. Now, having volunteered to purge every trace of Dumbledore's influence, Fudge looks increasingly like a man banking on luck to save his skin. And luck, as everyone knows, is a precarious thing, even for Cornelius Fudge. Barty Crouch's failure, his secret correspondence with Dumbledore, and the Ministry's desire for a gentler face in peacetime had unexpectedly propelled the inept Cornelius Fudge into the post of Minister for Magic. In the original timeline, Fudge had been fortunate enough to resign just before Voldemort's official return, unlike the ill-fated Rufus Scrimgeour, who died in office. Even his brief stint in Azkaban at the war's end had been surprisingly short. Who knew? Perhaps luck would again smile on him, granting yet another early retirement. The irony, of course, was delicious. All of this traced back to Ryan's ambitious cleanup of Nocturne Alley. His efforts to banish its worst elements had not only transformed that notorious street, but also encouraged Diagon Alley, just beyond the leaky cauldron, to open after dark. Crowds remained thin, however, and most witches and wizards were still unnerved by nighttime shopping, especially after the recent, widely publicized disappearance of Minister Fudge himself. As the hour grew late, Ryan and his two companions, Penelope and Kate, slipped an unnoticeable charm over themselves to lower their profiles. Gradually, they edged away from Nocturne's dim lanterns and toward the relative safety of Diagon's brighter lanes. It was Penelope who finally broke the silence. "Can we head back now?" she asked, the tension in her voice dissolving at last. "I never would have guessed Nocturne Alley could be so lively at night," Kate admitted, her tone equal parts relief and amazement. Together, they turned toward the leaky cauldron, the echoes of an unexpectedly bustling Nocturne Alley fading behind them. Kate paused at the mouth of the alley, torn between her long-held wish to head home and an unexpected pull toward Nocturne Alley's whispered excitement. She bit her lip, then looked at Penelope. "Shall we take another walk through here?" Penelope noticed the hesitation in her friend's eyes and offered softly, "We could." She felt a twinge of guilt. After all, she'd already led them on a wild goose chase. But if Kate really wanted to browse the shops, why not indulge her curiosity? And with Ryan watching over them, everything would be fine. "All right," she said, "let's go." Despite their parents' strict warnings, the three slipped into the narrow, cobblestoned lane. In daylight, this place brimmed with grimy black magic emporia, dusty windows displaying shrunken heads sealed in glass jars, iron cages teeming with ebony spiders, shelves stocked with flickering green poison candles, and piles of rusty stakes. Now, under the cloak of night, those horrors retreated beneath lantern light, their menace softened but never quite gone. Shadows danced at the edges of vision, reminders that, in Nocturne Alley, darkness always hides something more. Stalls had been set up across the polished white stone floor, which gleamed like a mirror. To Ryan's surprise, there was nothing grotesque or repulsive here, no overt black magic trappings. Instead, it felt more like a wholesale bazaar for rare potion ingredients. Everything on display was a treasure, but no direct retail was allowed, only bulk transactions for the initiated. Shelves and curtained booths held rows of specimen jars, monsters' blackened, calloused toes, crystalline vials of acromantula venom that shimmered emerald green, cursed unicorn blood crackling with latent electricity, and thunderbird feathers preserved in transparent, insulated flasks. Across the way, an array of brand-new, unusually shaped wands caught Kate's attention. One was suffused with a dreamy lavender mist. Another was hollow, its core smoldering like a phoenix's plume. A few looked more like iron rods, their cold steel reflecting the moonlight in harsh glints, and several were as white as jade, wisps of spectral birds swirling around their shafts. Kate tugged on Ryan's sleeve. He gave a firm nod. In the next heartbeat, the shimmer of their invisibility cloak faded away. Standing where the two of them had been invisible only moments before were three tall, broad-shouldered wizards draped in black robes, watching the stalls just as curiously as Kate and Ryan had been. Before Ryan and his friends could say a word, the elderly stallholder straightened and announced, with more bravado than he truly felt, "Behold my latest creations, the Dream Traveler, hewn from pale poplar, the Duel Master, carved from fiery red oak, the Soulbringer, fashioned of gleaming silver basswood, and my masterpiece, the Extraordinary Laurel, hewn from ash." Kate's eyes lit up the moment the names left his lips. "They're incredible," she breathed. "Even if it's just for show, I have to have one." A hush fell over the group as they leaned in to examine the fine woodwork and the subtle runes etched along each wand's length. Ryan exchanged a knowing glance with his companions. This was going to be an auction none of them would want to miss. Chapter 65. Kate bleeds heavily. Ryan stared up at the slanted rooftops of Nocturne Alley, utterly speechless. He'd never expected to stumble across his own handiwork among these forsaken stalls, and even more shocking, his beloved Kate was somehow caught in the middle of it all. The rows of wands on display weren't antiques or forgeries. They were Ryan's creations, forged through years of alchemical research. Astonishingly, their power equaled that of a true, original wand, that ancient wood-only implement with no magical core at all. Centuries ago, the first wandwrights learned that a precious few trees naturally produced wood attuned to magic, much as only a small fraction of humans were born with the gift. Recognizing a suitable tree took years of trial and error. Seasoned craftsmen would wander enchanted forests, testing saplings and mature trunks until they found the perfect grain. Once felled, These branches required no further carving or refinement. In fact, the uncarved primitive stick was believed to be even stronger. Rawness equated to potency. As demand grew and original wand wood remained scarce, later wand makers hesitated to experiment. It wasn't until a groundbreaking discovery, centuries after those primitive branches first channeled magic, that wand crafting truly transformed. By grafting a magical creature's core, unicorn hair, phoenix feather, or dragon heartstring, into more common woods, artisans could reproduce and even surpass the raw power of the ancient sticks. Consistency replaced chance, and wand-making entered the age we know today. Yet here in the gloom of Nocturne Alley were Ryan's alchemical originals, proof that he had unlocked a fresh path to raw magical energy, one that rivaled nature itself. And the price of that power, it seemed, was carved across Kate's trembling face, where a line of blood ran down her chin, staining her robes. Emotion and magic crackled around them both, and Ryan knew their world was about to change forever. Since the earliest Ollivanders, wand makers have known that any tree suitable for wands is home to bowtruckles, small guardians who prize living wood. This discovery transformed the craft. No longer did wizards simply hack and haul branches. They learned to treat each wand core as a living thing, carving and polishing the wood into elegant shapes without diminishing its power. In fact, experiments showed that as long as the wand's core remained intact, its magical strength was untouched by refinements in grain, finish, or decoration. As wandwood became more plentiful, the next breakthrough was to infuse it with potent alchemical substances. Carefully blended elixirs, crushed magical minerals, and even trace essences of rare creatures were worked into the wood's fibers. How these ingredients and the living wood enhanced each other is the greatest secret in wand lore, a secret fiercely protected by the Ollivanders and passed down only to a trusted few. Enter Ryan, an ambitious innovator determined to unlock every facet of that hidden synergy. He spared no expense. The finest wandwood, alchemical components worth a fortune, and the rarest cores, pristine phoenix feathers, dragon heartstrings harvested under the rarest lunar alignments. Yet time and again, his masterpieces proved only as powerful as a simple rod freshly plucked from the forest. Their true triumph lay in their appearance. Drawing on designs he'd once sketched for a Harry Potter-themed dress-up game in a previous life, Ryan crafted wands that were slender, sinuous, and exquisitely detailed, captivating to the eye, even if they never surpassed raw, unadorned wood in raw magical might. Ryan sneered at the wand's weak enchantments and refused to tarnish the reputation of his Skywalker alchemy workshop. Instead, he'd quietly pass them off to some veteran Smith family employees, dangling a generous commission for every sale. Naturally, that made the wands expensive, and so far, only one had found a buyer. A sleek, ominous elderwood wand, nicknamed the Extraordinary Guide, its tip pulsing with an eerie green glow. The purchaser? Malfoy. Not Draco Malfoy, but Lucius. Apparently, its dark black magic design had been too tempting to resist. Ryan had spent the entire day grinning over that single sale, but now his satisfaction vanished. Kate, calm down. After all, they're just fakes, he told himself. Fake? Kate shot back in his mind. Shaking herself free of misgivings, she approached the makeshift stall. Clad in a flowing black robe that gave her an imposing air, she scrutinized the assortment of wands. Then she fixed the old vendor with a cool look and asked, "How much for these?" The old man flinched back, but recalling how cleverly he'd tricked even Lucius Malfoy, he straightened his shoulders. With a confident nod, he leaned in to give her the answer. "These wands cost 100 gold galleons each," the stallholder announced, his voice a mixture of pride and challenge. Kate blinked at the price tag, then exchanged a glance with Ryan. 100 gold galleons! She knew Ryan could afford almost anything, but her instinct to haggle flared. After all, Ollivander, Britain's most celebrated wandmaker, rarely charged more than 10 galleons for his finest work. The vendor, an elderly man in threadbare robes, caught her look of disbelief and sneered. "These wands are infused with rare magical metals and advanced enchantments. Ollivander's offerings can't compare. Even at full price, his top models cost no less than 50 galleons, and that's before any discounts." Kate frowned. 50 galleons? She'd never heard of Ollivander ever pricing a wand that high. She glanced at Ryan. He gave a small nod, indicating he, too, believed the old man's claim. "All right," Kate said, folding her arms. "But aside from their appearance, what makes them worth 100 galleons?" She let her gaze drift to the few customers lingering near the adjacent stall, where phoenix feathers and dragon scale powder sold for small fortunes, and no one batted an eye. If this crowd was comfortable splurging on rare potion ingredients, they wouldn't balk at a pricey wand unless there was a catch. The vendor's lined face twitched, the wrinkle-deepening motion betraying a flicker of unease. Kate's suspicions sharpened. True confidence would have come unruffled. There had to be more to these wands than met the eye. In the world of wandcraft, a wand's true power lies not in its wood, but in the skill of the witch or wizard who wields it. Only those with exceptional talent can coax its full might into a spell. In less capable hands, it's scarcely more effective than a wooden stick. "What, are you saying I'm an ordinary wizard?" Kate muttered under her breath, arching an eyebrow at the shopkeeper. The old man behind the counter merely smiled. At his side, Ryan, the shop's owner, watched with mild amusement. He knew better than anyone how his senior salesman draped each pitch in confidence and half-truths to make even the most skeptical customer bite. And this time, they had an ace in the hole. These wands had come straight from Lucius Malfoy. Even without a polished sales routine, demand would skyrocket once word got out. Kate's gaze settled on a slender wand crowned by a hollow orb, within which electric blue sparks danced like captured lightning. "All right," she said quietly. "I'm convinced I have what it takes. What's this one called, and how much is it?" "Ah, an excellent choice," the old man exclaimed, lifting the wand with reverent care. "This is my pièce de résistance, 13.5 inches of the finest pine, its core spun from a single thunderbird feather. It's incredibly sturdy, brimming with raw, untamed power. As for a name, how about the Thunderfeather Loop?" He snapped his fingers as if on cue, and then broke into exaggerated applause. "Marvelous, isn't it?" Pinello opened his mouth to object, but when he saw the faint excitement in Kate's posture, he wisely clamped it shut. It wasn't a huge sum anyway. Over the years, he and Kate had already earned plenty by helping Ryan with illustrations and voiceovers. Even if this wand proved worthless, at worst it would serve as a makeshift candle on a dark night, he told himself. Kate turned back to the old vendor, feigning a casual tone. "So this one's 100 gold galleons as well?" The old man smiled and gave a slight bow. "Since you have such discerning taste, I can offer you a special discount." "A discount?" Kate's face lit up, and in her delight she forgot all decorum, stomping her foot like a little girl who just won a prize. Ryan frowned, a flicker of doubt crossing his mind. That pricing seemed oddly generous. Had his disillusionment charm slipped? Was the old man on to him? With a theatrical flourish, the vendor announced, "All right then, 99 gold galleons, and I'll include the matching wand set." Kate paused for a heartbeat, then, teeth clenched, eyes shining, she threw her head back and declared, "Fine, I'll buy it." Chapter 66. Thoughts on the eve of term miles, from the twisting alleys of Nocturne. Nottingham Forest lay blanketed in a delicate, snow-like mist. A narrow yet sumptuous path wound its way beneath ancient oaks, its cobbles intricately carved with griffins, dragons, and other legendary beasts. In the distance, a majestic tower soared skyward, its pale stone bathed in a soft, golden light that illuminated the approach. Silence reigned, broken only by a cold wind sighing through the branches. Then, from the forest edge, a plump black cat padded onto the path. He stretched luxuriously and let out a long, lazy yawn, as if waiting for someone. And then, with a faint pop like bursting bubbles, 3 figures materialized on the fog-shrouded lane. The cat's golden eyes snapped wide. In an instant, his sleek form blurred into a dark shadow, and he streaked toward the figure at the center. Ryan, freshly summoned through a dimensional barrier to the tree-lined drive before Smith Castle, barely had time to regain his bearings, or to greet Kate and Penelo before the hefty furball landed squarely in his arms. "Jerry!" he exclaimed, relief flooding through him as his old companion purred against his chest. "Why have you gotten so plump?" Penelo teased, poking the kitten nestled in Ryan's arms. Jerry twisted around, lifted his fluffy bottom toward her, and let out a stream of indignant meows. "Is he cursing me?" Penelo said, half appalled, half amused. She knew Jerry wasn't an ordinary kitten, just like Dr. Flywheel, the magic-imbued hamster who spent his days dozing in Ryan's bedroom. But while Dr. Flywheel paid no mind to silliness, Jerry's pride was more delicate. After all, he used to be such a sleek little thing. He simply couldn't take the joke lying down. Ryan chuckled and slipped a hand under Jerry's chin. The kitten's eyes grew heavy with contentment, and his tail flicked back and forth in quiet delight. Penelo sniffed. "Go on," she challenged. "Aren't you going to meow something clever back at me? Or have I offended your royal highness?" Before Jerry could mount a retort, Kate, her cheeks puffed in mock frustration, dug into her satchel and produced 3 wands. "This is mine," she announced, holding out a slender wand of pale pine that glimmered faintly with sparks of stored thunder. "And because I can't stand the thought of you two going wandless, I bought one for each of you." She set the other 2 wands on the table. "This," she said, handing one to Ryan, "is a blackthorn wand named Dragon Knight. See how the shaft seems filled with a dark mist? The spiraling handle leads up to a dragon's head naturally carved from the wood itself. Perfect partner to Lane's White Knight and Black Knight." Penelo picked up her wand next, a precious gift from Kate, and turned it over in her hand, smiling at the wood's honeyed grain. With wands finally in place, and Jerry purring his approval on Ryan's shoulder, the 3 friends felt ready for whatever magical adventures lay ahead. Penelo's staff lay before them on a velvet cushion. A perfectly polished acacia wood shaft, crowned with a broad, band-shaped yellow crystal that glowed faintly with a golden light, even in the dim shop. It was called the Timekeeper's Staff. Kate stared at the 3 exquisite wands before her, each more beautiful than the last, and felt her confidence slip away. How on earth was she supposed to choose? Ryan tore his gaze away from the sleek instrument and the black shop cat curled in his lap. "Didn't I say I'd pick up the bill?" he reminded her, voice mild but firm. After days of stroking that cat and ogling Penelo's masterpieces, he'd come back to reality at last. He knew far too well what set these wands apart from anything he'd ever seen in casual dress-up games. No troll hair cores or scrap wood handles here, but genuine dragon heartstrings and woods so rare they cost a small fortune. Still, he wondered whether buyers were drawn by real magic or mere showmanship. Did anyone need a golden aura to be convinced? "I don't even want one of these," he muttered under his breath. "I've got enough galleons. Besides, I haven't surprised you with a gift in ages." Kate's lips curved into a teasing smile. "Fine then. My treat," she said. She produced a tiny charm from her sleeve, the thunder feather, and held it between her fingers. With a swift flick of her wrist, electric sparks raced outward in a crackling arc, dancing along the pine trees that lined the street outside. Needles glowed like miniature lanterns before dissolving in a final pop of light. "Impressive," Ryan admitted, dropping a handful of coins on the counter. Kate tucked the thunder feather away and reached into her robe for a seal-stamped parchment. "By the way, aren't you curious about what Voldemort wrote?" Ryan's grin faltered. Beyond the shop window, the world felt suddenly colder, but infinitely more interesting. Penelo lowered her voice, adopting a conspiratorial air. "You know how the Department of Mysteries hoards its forbidden lore, never letting a whisper of it slip out." She shot a meaningful glance at Ryan, silently urging him to play along and draw Kate's attention away from the wand. After all, Kate was a Ravenclaw. By reputation, nothing piqued her curiosity quite like ancient secrets. Penelo was certain the elegantly carved magical wand in Kate's hand would prove irresistible. But to her surprise, Kate barely spared it a second glance. "Honestly, it's just another Voldemort relic," Kate muttered, exasperation coloring her tone. Part of her admired the wand's exquisite craftsmanship, yet another part ached with frustration. She loved acquiring knowledge, but between the whirlwind expedition to Atlantis and Ryan's occasional slip of the tongue, she'd already swallowed more secrets than she cared for. Penelo, in contrast, spent her summers traveling the world with her jet-setting parents. She wrote nearly a letter a day during those trips, and while she cherished the routine, she knew deep down it couldn't compare to Kate's real-life adventures at Ryan's side. Kate scoffed at Voldemort's writings, nothing more than trite sayings steeped in the outdated, idealistic lore of the wizarding world. She knew exactly how the coming days would play out. Kate would spend her time lamenting the gold galleons she'd lost, while Penello would pepper Ryan with questions about every facet of the Muggle world, constantly comparing his answers to Voldemort's so-called arcane knowledge. Ryan, for his part, found the book profoundly disappointing. He wasn't shocked by the information. It was all painfully familiar, but he was astonished that someone as vehemently anti-Muggle as Voldemort could have written it. In these pages, the young Tom Riddle adopts a Muggle's viewpoint to detail everyday essentials: food, housing, transportation, lays out a basic definition of science, and marvels at the convenience and speed of modern travel. He even chronicles the century's greatest milestones, from the moon landing to the atomic bomb. It was downright incredible that these straightforward observations came from the pen of a wizard supremacist who'd long boasted of disdain for Muggle affairs. Yet here they were, plain as day, revealing how little he'd truly understood. Unlike the typical Muggle studies curriculum, which always highlights Muggles' strengths, downplays their weaknesses, and subtly praises the wizarding world, Tom Riddle's books are refreshingly candid. He doesn't shy away from exposing the most unsettling facets of non-magical society. For instance, while Hogwarts lessons merely call the atomic bomb incredibly powerful and claim that a dozen talented transfigurers could intercept it, Riddle provides its precise yield, the temperatures at its core, and the behavior of its radiation in exhaustive detail. Likewise, when discussing Muggle transportation, he doesn't repeat the usual assertion that a witch or wizard could fly alongside a fighter jet on broomstick without so much as a hair out of place. Instead, he crunches the numbers, comparing the top speed of a Nimbus 2001 to that of a modern jet, and then explains why the resulting air pressure would literally rip a broom and its rider to shreds. These in-depth analyses go far beyond anything seen in a standard Muggle studies textbook. By pulling back the curtain on both the marvels and the risks of the non-magical world, Riddle's work undermines the invisible bias that has long sheltered young witches and wizards. Yet for Ryan, none of these revelations matter as much as one simple fact. This eye-opening book was written by Tom Riddle himself. Ryan sat in silence, his curiosity fixed on one question: how would Professor Tom Riddle present the material in these books? Officially, Riddle held the Defense Against the Dark Arts chair, but would he really compare dangerous Muggle inventions to dark magic? Or was he merely teaching Muggle studies, forced to adopt the Dada title by the infamous curse? What was his true intent in accepting this post? He pushed the questions aside. Now that he could glimpse fragments of the future with a single thought, discretion was paramount. Staying alert and keeping his mind fresh would serve him far better than idle speculation. After all, the new term was about to begin, and Ryan intended to be ready for whatever lay ahead. Chapter 67, Luna September 1st at last dawned, the first day of term at Hogwarts. In late August, Kate and Penelope had gone home, determined to feign ignorance of school life until the very last minute. With their absence, Ryan finally found the time he'd been craving, a chance to study Nagini up close. Until now, everyone had treated her simply as a woman. Kate had even unearthed an old photograph of Nagini performing in the Circus Arcanus, and Ryan had never felt free to examine her carefully. Now, however, he at last traced her cool skin with his fingertips, probing for any sign of magic or curse. He felt a twinge of resentment. He wasn't pursuing cheap thrills but rigorous research. After all, Dumbledore himself often lays aside his wand to gauge magical phenomena with hand and eye. Nowhere is that more appropriate than when examining a cursed being. Ryan was sure Penelope and the others would understand. Now, if only they'd stopped to think. Nagini, granted a fragile, memory-blank human form by Shaha's blood curse, leaned against his shoulder and offered a soft, encouraging nod. Ryan could hardly believe how potent that curse was, binding her so thoroughly that her own memories slipped through her fingers like water. But Hogwarts was calling. As evening fell on the 1st of September, Ryan scooped up Jerry, now a delightfully plump little cat, and, tears in his eyes, whispered a hasty farewell over his shoulder to Nagini. Tomorrow, the Great Hall would beckon them all back to school. It was the height of summer, and the nights were too hot for a cool, slithering body to do any good. Ryan leaned over the foot of the bed and jabbed a finger at his cat, Jerry. What are you staring at, huh? Rely on you? Fat cat, Jerry. No one likes a chubby cat, except me, of course. Jerry merely purred, curled tighter, and went back to sleep. Ever since the little guy had packed on the pounds, he dozed all day and barely stirred. This lazy furball needs straightening out, Ryan muttered. So this morning, he arrived at the train station early and claimed an empty compartment. He deliberately picked one right by the carriage entrance, arranging his trunk and scarf so that only someone he really wanted to see would notice him. A few minutes later, a gentle knock sounded at the door. Ryan sat up. A petite witch with snowy hair peered in, her bright eyes widening as she took him in. "Hello? Is this seat free?" she asked, her voice hopeful and a little dazed. "Of course," Ryan said with a smile. He already knew exactly who she was. He'd meant to join Harry and the others, as he always did, but that morning, while watching Harry Potter at the Burrow over breakfast, he'd caught sight of this intriguing little witch for the first time. And now, here she was, right on cue. Ryan hadn't planned on involving Luna Lovegood. Her intuition was too sharp, and in Harry's eyes, she simply didn't cut it. After all, Pansy Parkinson might be spiteful, but at least she presented herself neatly, whereas Luna, pretty though she was, always struck Harry as a bedraggled poodle. That judgment, he felt, proved his instincts were spot on. What he didn't expect was to be completely undone by her. The graceful, idealized Harry Potter, whom everyone admired, had just met his match in Luna. From Harry's viewpoint, Luna's hair was a tangled, dirty mass that hung down to her waist. Her eyebrows were barely there, her eyes bulged as if she were constantly surprised, and her whole manner gave off a slightly unhinged air. To top it off, she kept her wand tucked behind her left ear, wore a necklace strung with butterbeer corks, and often read magazines upside down. Ryan, observing all this, shook his head in disbelief. Surely Harry had to be mistaken, or worse, unwell. Luna's hair might have been tousled, but it was anything but filthy. In the right light it glimmered pale gold, almost silver, the hidden threads of gold catching the sun. The real reason Harry saw dirt was simpler. The hue reminded him all too much of Draco Malfoy's hair, the very sight of which he loathed in the original timeline. In short, Harry's proof against Luna was nothing more than his own biases, and Ryan was all too aware that things were about to get very interesting when those biases collided with Luna's uncanny insight. Her hair was so irresistibly fluffy that Harry couldn't help but, at least momentarily, think of Hermione in one of her more unruly moods. And those wide, luminous eyes, set against Luna's round porcelain features, lent her an almost childlike charm. Yet Ryan suspected Harry's hesitation wasn't really about Luna at all, but rather an echo of his impressions of Professor Trelawney. To Harry, Trelawney had always felt like a prophetic specter, eccentric and untethered from reality, and Luna's dreamy detachment struck him in much the same way. He found himself withholding judgment, wary of sharing her company. But Ryan saw something entirely different in Luna. He knew that her worth extended far beyond a whimsical appearance. What truly set her apart was her uncanny, wizarding intuition. Luna could sense the tiniest inconsistencies, an unspoken implication in someone's words, a missing flourish in a spell, the faintest note of discomfort in a friend's tone. She was, in effect, a walking magnifying glass for subtle truths. Relying on her instincts, she often spoke with startling bluntness, an honesty that could feel like a precision strike. For Ryan, though, that sharpness was her greatest asset. It had nothing to do with looks. Luna's real magic lay in the dazzling acuity of her mind. Ryan had always possessed an uncanny intuition for magic. Perhaps only Harry Potter himself was ever more sensitive. Even Harry's sorting into Gryffindor, an impulsive Gryffindor spirit, often masked the deeper, instinctive grasp of wizardry that lay at his core. But Ryan felt magic in ways few could imagine. He stood alone in the secret chamber, convinced that no one else could possibly have found it. Then, suddenly, a bright voice broke the hush. "May I ask your name? I'm really curious." Ryan whirled around. In the doorway stood a girl with silvery hair tumbling around her shoulders and enormous moonlit eyes. Her Ravenclaw robes hung loose, and a faint tremor ran through her hand as she clasped her wand. There was something disarmingly frank about her, utterly unafraid to show exactly what she felt. Given her chronic struggles with academics, it wasn't hard to believe that even Ravenclaw's reputation for embracing eccentrics didn't quite stretch to her peculiar brand of oddity. "Ryan Smith," he said, meeting her gaze without flinching. She studied him, unblinking, as though she could read every secret etched in his features. A typical first-year witch might have been rendered speechless by his striking, almost otherworldly good looks. Luna, however, merely smiled. "How can other witches and wizards not see this room? What kind of spell is at work here?" she asked, genuine wonder in her voice. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, she added, "By the way, you're very handsome. Your eyes are exactly my shade. Would you like to be friends?" In that moment, the hidden chamber seemed to glow brighter, alive with the promise of an unexpected friendship. "This magic you possess is inborn, just as a metamorph magus can reshape his features or even change his hair color. You too can alter your appearance at will. And why shouldn't you? You're very cute." Ryan offered his long, slender hand to Luna. She hesitated for a moment, then reached out, gave his hand a quick shake, and pulled hers back as if he'd been holding a branding iron. Clearly, she was still shy. "Cute?" Luna's brow furrowed. "Dad says I'm cute too, but I've noticed most people don't really like me." Her voice wavered, but when she raised her eyes to Ryan's, her shyness vanished as if a curtain had been drawn back. Ryan smiled gently. "That's exactly why being different is a blessing. It keeps the ones who only care about fitting in far away. They're the ones who bring trouble. And in the end, you either compromise who you are or become the two, when oddball." He met her steady gaze. "You're just a kid. Why would I be afraid of you?" Luna let out a soft laugh, the tension in her shoulders easing. "So, I can stop worrying about troublemakers." She looked up at him, hope brightening her eyes. "I'm really glad I found a friend like you, Ryan." Chapter 68, Malfoy's Hegemony Returns. Luna Lovegood and Ryan found themselves locked in silence inside a crowded Hogwarts Express compartment. For who knows how long, they simply stared at each other, the train's rhythmic clatter the only sound around them. Finally, feeling self-conscious, Luna slipped a fresh copy of the Quibbler from her bag and held it up in front of her face, hiding behind its colorful front page. The scenery outside blurred past as Luna's pale blue eyes peeked over the top of the magazine. "Why can't I hear anything?" she asked softly, tilting her head. Ryan couldn't help but smile at her earnest expression. "Soundproof bats," he offered quietly. Luna lowered the magazine, propping her elbows on the little wooden table between them. She leaned forward, curious. "Soundproof bats?" Her eyebrows shot up. "What are those?" Ryan paused, choosing his words. "They're like invisible, ghosts of the wizarding world. They drift close to witches and wizards, but they hate large crowds. They feed on silence, you could say." Intrigued, Luna inched forward to catch every word. Ryan, without thinking, matched her movement, shortening the distance between them. A warm breath brushed his cheek as Luna leaned in, her quirky radish earrings swaying gently. Realizing how close they were, Luna's eyes widened, and she instinctively scooted back, clutching her magazine to her chest. Ryan froze, a faint blush creeping up his neck. Outside, the train sped on beneath a gathering twilight, a perfect stage for words neither of them was quite ready to say. Luna and I had something in common. When we were alone and lost in our own worlds, reality seemed to bend around us. It always happened when we slipped on those little noise-canceling earpieces, silent, invisible, and perfect for shutting out everything else. I loved them for that. They let me dive into a book so completely I didn't even hear my dad calling me down for dinner. "I know exactly what you mean," Luna said, nodding as if she'd felt the same thing 1,000 times. Then she leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "But don't worry, they're not going to mess with you. They're harmless." She turned her head, eyes dramatic. "They just drift into your ears and scramble your thoughts, like little gremlins in your brain. Makes you feel disoriented for a minute." I closed my book and looked at her. "So there must be a few of those gremlins around here, huh? Because my head's still spinning." Luna raised her magazine to cover her face, peeking over the top. "I promise you, those things won't harass you." I smiled. "You don't count as one of the gremlins, do you?" She froze, the corners of her eyes twitching. "What?" she whispered. I feigned innocence. "I just mean, aren't we friends? Shouldn't you at least know my name before you start defending me? Her magazine dropped halfway, and she stammered, I. Of course I. Then she cleared her throat and said nothing more, as if simply changing the subject could banish the awkward moment. I suppose asking a pretty girl her name isn't exactly the height of chivalry, Ryan thought, though he couldn't stop the small smile tugging at his lips. Luna said nothing in return, but the way her knuckles whitened around the magazine told him she was far from calm. My name is Luna. Luna Lovegood, she finally whispered, her voice no louder than a mosquito's chirp. All right, Luna, Ryan replied softly. My new friend, Luna. Luna's cheeks flushed crimson. She realized he must have heard her name clearly the first time, when her voice had sounded even smaller. They sat in silence for nearly 10 minutes before a soft cooing sound drifted in from the corridor. Luna looked toward the compartment door in surprise. Her father had promised that a food trolley would pass by soon. He never lied, except, of course, about her mother coming home. Blinking, she faced Ryan again. I thought you might like something to eat, he said, withdrawing his wand. With a swift flick of his wrist, a splendid spread materialized on the little table between them, golden meat pies, flaky pastries, and plump, roasted tomatoes. The warm, savory aroma filled the compartment instantly. He swept his hand over the feast and gave her a friendly nod. I hope this will do. Jerry didn't wait for an invitation. He darted straight for the small bowl on the floor, brimming with ultra-tender stewed beef, his absolute favorite. As one of Ryan's magical creations, Jerry didn't need to relieve himself, but he certainly loved to eat. In no time at all, the bowl was clean. Ryan smirked and offered Luna the next helping. Your turn. Luna lifted her chopsticks and nibbled at the beef in tiny, precise bites. Her cheeks puffed out adorably, like a squirrel hoarding nuts. By the time they'd finished, the sky outside had grown dim and misty, and the table gleamed as if no meal had ever been served on it. That spotless surface belied the earlier chaos. Someone's very first attempt at using chopsticks had sent soup splattering everywhere, and Ryan had finally given up and fed him by hand. Now Luna crouched behind a glossy magazine, pretending to be engrossed in its pages. Ryan leaned in. What are you reading? Her face flushed crimson behind the paper, but she tapped a headline and rolled the magazine around so he could see it. The mysterious Elder Wand resurfaces. Malfoy's shadow of domination rises again. For most witches and wizards today, the Malfoys are little more than opportunistic villains, a thoroughly corrupt family of Death Eaters. What many have forgotten, however, is that under the stewardship of the little-known Septimus Malfoy, the Ministry of Magic once bowed to the whims of his puppet, Osbert Unchus. If a Malfoy has ever shown the ambition and cunning to seize power, it was then. And make no mistake, their appetite for influence has not waned. Central to whispers now drifting through Diagon Alley and beyond is the Elder Wand, one of the 3 legendary Deathly Hallows celebrated in the Tales of Beetle the Bard. Renowned as the most powerful wand ever fashioned, its mastery promises unrivaled magical supremacy. To possess it is to command forces no other witch or wizard could hope to match. Late one moonless night, an anonymous watcher in Diagon Alley swore never to forget what they saw. The street was deserted, shadows pooling between shuttered shop fronts, when a tall figure emerged from the gloom. It was Lucius Malfoy, his silver hair gleaming faintly, his pale features lit by a sickly green glow. Clutched in his white-gloved hand was a wand, radiating an eerie emerald light that danced along the cobblestones. The witness collapsed at once, undone by fear and surprise. In the darkness, they were spared whatever curse might have followed that unholy glow. No ordinary wand glows jade green from tip to pommel, and no other wood but elder could carry such a deadly hue. If Lucius Malfoy truly holds the Elder Wand, then every witch and wizard in Britain ought to tremble, not just at the thought of his vendettas, but at the possibility that the most formidable magic in the world now bends to the Malfoy ambition once more. What kind of wand could possibly reduce the ever-serious Lucius Malfoy to uncontrollable laughter? We refused to guess at random, so we adopted a painstakingly thorough approach. Letters went out to every wand maker we could identify across Europe. Their unanimous answer? None of them had made, or could make, the wand described by our mysterious tipster. Unconvinced, we turned next to Mr. Ollivander, the world's most celebrated wandsmith. His response was the same. If such a wand truly existed, even he could not produce it. That left us with only one conclusion. Lucius Malfoy must be in possession of the legendary, unbeatable Elder Wand. Well written, Ryan piped up, a proud smile on her face. My father's the editor of this magazine, remember? Luna's usually reserved expression brightened as she considered the claim. Honestly, it sounds entirely plausible. The Malfoys have always had uncanny streaks of fortune, particularly before they laid hands on the Elder Wand. Look at Draco. By some odd twist of fate, he became friends with both Harry Potter and Ron Weasley, the very rivals his family once despised. And then there's Sirius Black, once branded a Death Eater, now fully exonerated under circumstances no one can explain. She leaned forward, voice dropping to a serious whisper. Something extraordinary is at work here. Chapter 69. Loud-mouthed Ron Luna Lovegood paced back and forth in the half-lit common room, her voice animated as she wove a tale of the Malfoys' hidden schemes and the deadly power of the Deathly Hallows. Ryan sat on a worn armchair, eyes fixed on her, and with every passing minute, Luna's words grew softer, as if she sensed her audience fading away. Ryan, she finally paused, brow knitting in concern, do you have any questions? He blinked, startled back to reality. How did Luna know so much? He wondered, studying the way her hair fell over one shoulder, the gentle curve of her lips. She'd been hastily nibbling on a butterscotch earlier, and now a faint sheen clung to her mouth, like the perfect unintentional lip gloss. My concentration's shot to pieces, he chastised himself, blaming that meddlesome Nagini for leading him astray. Well, he stammered, then forced himself to speak. I love reading. I want to join Ravenclaw, just like my parents did. Luna's face brightened as if she'd expected nothing less. Extraordinary intelligence is a wizard's greatest treasure, she declared in a sing-song tone. A wise choice, Ryan agreed, sliding from the chair to stand beside her. I'm a Ravenclaw at heart. He hesitated, curious about Luna's family, but he didn't ask. Not everyone pried into parentage the way Ron Weasley did, after all, and Luna's earlier composure made it clear. Ryan was no Ron. They shared a quiet smile. Luna tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, and for a moment, the looming threats of Malfoy plots and enchanted relics seemed to fade into the background. Knowledge, they both knew, was the weapon they'd need most. Ryan felt a surge of relief that he hadn't been stuck in a compartment with Ron. Anything else would have been a disaster. He'd signaled Hermione to find him, so it was strange that she only appeared now. He guessed she must have noticed the unguarded compartment and realized he was inside. After all, she'd been thinking about him just moments ago. Hermione stood quietly at the far end of the carriage, her chestnut hair pulled back and her keen eyes scanning the doors. From the neighboring compartment, Ron's voice suddenly erupted, utterly unaware of how loud or absurd his complaint sounded. My mum was furious when Lockhart got exposed, Ron thundered. Now Dad's made me buy this ridiculous book, written by Voldemort of all people. It set us back a whole galleon. Dad claimed it was brilliant, until he found out who wrote it. He waved the black cover in exasperation. Inside the cramped compartment with him were Harry and Draco, and every seat and corner was piled high with sweets. Licorice wands, Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, chocolate frogs, and dozens of other treats rumored to come from the Hogwarts Express trolley. Scabbers, his once brown fur now shot through with gray, lay sprawled across a discarded sliver of pumpkin pie, pausing every few licks to stretch luxuriously. Harry sat beside him at the burrow's creaky wooden table, his eyes drifting back to the open book in front of him. This Voldemort is more terrifying than ours ever was, he muttered, turning a dog-eared page. He tapped his wand against the margin, where he'd scrawled a note. Arrogant, ignorant, even bungled his Horcrux trap badly and never learned from it, stubborn as ever. Harry flicked forward. But this version, he's completely different, humbled by defeat, genuinely curious about muggles. He looked down at Scabbers, who was now washing pie crumbs from his paws. He studies their world, respects their inventions, things our Voldemort would have sneered at. As Harry read on, he realized just how advanced this dark wizard had become. Where the standard Muggle studies curriculum at Hogwarts barely went beyond teaching wizards how to dress in Muggle clothes, catch a train, or operate a toaster, This book dove into the practical integration of Muggle engineering with magical theory. How to enchant an engine, channel electricity through a wand, even retrofit household appliances to run on wand-shaped Poe were sources. Harry closed the book with a slow exhale. If anyone could rewrite the rules of magic and technology, it's him. Scabbers twitched an ear, as if in agreement, before drifting off into a contented nap. If the standard Muggle Studies course teaches a wizard how to blend seamlessly into the non-magical world, this Defense Against the Dark Arts module serves as a sobering reminder of the reality behind those Muggle artifacts we wizards learn about only from textbooks. How fast can the world's most advanced train really travel? And how does that speed compare to a Nimbus 2001 broomstick? The more he turned the pages, the clearer the figure became, that of Gellert Grindelwald, the man Dumbledore once studied so closely. Grindelwald was nothing like Voldemort. While Voldemort had swept across Europe in a frenzy of destruction, Grindelwald pursued a far subtler ambition. He stood on grand podiums and delivered speeches so compelling that crowds fell silent, hanging on his every word. If anyone dared challenge him, or if he judged them a threat to his cause, they vanished behind iron bars or faced even darker fates. Grindelwald's message was unnervingly straightforward. In several fields, the magic community had already been outpaced by Muggles, and unless wizards took decisive action, they risked losing everything. His heterochromatic eyes, said to glimpse shards of the future, only amplified the weight of his warnings. In every line, he spoke not as a fanatic, but as a prophet convinced his truths demanded to be heard. If they'd only moved more deliberately instead of rushing headlong, the statute of secrecy might have fallen away years ago. Wizards could have revealed themselves to the world, or, failing that, been dragged into ruin by fearful Muggle governments wielding nukes. And this young version of Voldemort is no exception. In fact, he understands Muggles far better than most of us, and approaches them with a humility we never expected. All he had to do was take a post at Hogwarts and teach his own truths. Give him a few years in front of students hungry for power and prestige, and the wizarding world would be unrecognizable, either overthrown from within or shattered by Muggle retaliation. It chills me to imagine what might have happened if Dumbledore hadn't stepped in. Harry's face was pale. He looked as though he'd just glimpsed his own doom. I couldn't help but lean forward. What Dumbledore did last year, everything he pulled off against you-know-who, proves he's not about to make a blunder now. Voldemort's appointment may look like a coup, but it's really playing right into Dumbledore's hands. Remember how Voldemort's fragmented soul ended up on Quirrell's skull? This is the same sort of plan, only bigger. Ron glanced over at us, bewildered, as he brushed Scabbers aside. The rat scurried off, leaving a slimy trail of pumpkin pie in its wake. He scooped up his slice, shook off the crumbs, and took a bite, still staring. "I'm with Draco on this one," Harry said quietly. "If anyone can outmaneuver Voldemort, it's Albus Dumbledore." I nodded, swallowing the last of my hesitation. Whatever games were afoot at Hogwarts, we'd stick close to Dumbledore's side, and trust that he already had every move calculated. If you uncover the truth and then shove it aside, pretending it isn't there, you only let the danger grow until it's far worse and nearly impossible to control. Draco leaned back on the soft seat of the Hogwarts Express compartment, staring at Ron with mild curiosity. Harry frowned at his friend. "What are you talking about, Ron?" Ron wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, crumbs clinging to his fingers. "It's like when my family couldn't afford real medicine when I was a kid. Whenever I got hurt, Mum would lop off whatever part was rotting and then heal it with a spell. My dad," he said, eyes shining, "he's kind of the same philosophy on a grand scale. Root out the corruption in the wizarding world before it spreads. He's even been sneaking Muggle supplies and turning them into disinfectants to hell. Fight the wounds no one else will touch." Harry and Draco stared at him, jaws dropping in unison. Draco finally shook his head. "Leave it to you, Weasley. Honestly," Harry added with a grin, "only you would compare the Dark Lord to an infected cut." Ron threw them both a puzzled look and a half-proud grin. "Hey, I'm a Ravenclaw too, you know, the only one in the entire Weasley family." At that moment, Hermione, standing outside the compartment door, froze. She should have gone back to Harry's compartment as soon as she felt something was off. Instead, she'd assumed Ron was just rambling through another of his grand declarations. Now her mind reeled with what she'd heard on the train. Voldemort, Tom Riddle, was about to be offered the Defense Against the Dark Arts professorship. Dumbledore was seriously considering appointing the most feared name in wizarding history to teach that very subject. Hermione's heart pounded. This couldn't be happening. She had to warn Harry, but how? It looks like I only have the opening line. Could you please provide the full chapter text that you'd like me to revise? Once I have the complete passage, I'll rewrite it into smooth, natural English while preserving all your plot points and details. Chapter 70. Uneasy Hermione. All at once, the world went silent. Hermione paused mid-thought, aware that the soft murmurs she'd been subconsciously replying to had vanished along with every other sound in the compartment. She felt adrift, as though stranded on a tiny island. The hush was so complete it stirred a sudden memory. This was exactly the emptiness she'd experienced in the tunnels to Atlantis, where only her own voice reverberated. In that vacuum, even the grinding of her teeth and the rustle of robes became startlingly loud. Yet Hermione did not panic. She knew who was coming. Ryan Smith, mysterious, powerful, and, if rumors were to be believed, far more formidable in magic than Dumbledore, as well as undeniably handsome, was on his way. She had admired him all summer, and now she felt the familiar certainty of his presence before he even spoke. Hermione, what's wrong? His soft, concerned voice came from her side as he continued a muted conversation with Luna. Then, with a subtle flick of his wand, he wove a new form out of thin air and appeared behind Hermione. His expression was gentle, tinged with genuine worry, as though he couldn't fathom why she had called him. She blinked, as if awakening from a dream, and brushed a stray curl from her forehead. I just felt like you needed me right now. Ryan gave a small, reassuring smile and reached out to ruffle her bushy hair. In that moment of quiet intimacy, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt charged with promise. Hermione's cheeks flushed as she nervously smoothed her robes. Then, steeling herself, she fixed Ryan with a serious glare. Ryan, Ron just told me the most unbelievable news. Voldemort is going to be our Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. If that's true, Dumbledore must be out of his mind. Last year, he let Voldemort waltz right into Hogwarts. The portraits say he's no more than a disembodied spirit, a wandering soul. But this is our school. In the Muggle world, a headmaster who did something like that wouldn't just resign. He'd be facing years in jail. Hermione's voice wobbled, but she pressed on, fear and anger pouring out of her in a relentless tide. Do you understand what this means? It's like hiding the world's most dangerous terrorist in the only school responsible for the entire country's future. Even without a body or any weapons, Voldemort is the most powerful Dark Lord to ever darken the wizarding world. I came to Hogwarts to learn magic, not to live alongside the greatest evil of our time. Her words cut off as she struggled to catch her breath, her chest rising and falling in rapid, panicked gulps. Ryan reached out and gently took her trembling hand. Hermione, I understand why you're so frightened. Hermione paused, her brow creasing in thought. You're forgetting one thing. We're wizards, and magic, combined with what we learn, is power in itself. If you stretch your analogy, Hogwarts isn't just a school. It's the most formidable military academy in the Muggle world. Professor Dumbledore commands the strongest army on the planet, and they're stationed here, hidden beneath the castle's battlements. Ryan leaned forward, eyes bright with excitement. Right. And Voldemort? He may lead a terrorist network, but he has no conventional arsenal, only the most advanced flying machines ever invented, which let him slip through every trap. Inside Hogwarts, he's got just one operative, Professor Quirrell. Last semester's chaos was his best shot at unleashing threats on the world, yet a lone infiltrator stands no chance against fully armed students under Dumbledore's watchful guard. Hermione smiled, picking up his thread. Exactly. Think of it this way. The young Voldemort, the new face of the terror cell, was swiftly dealt with by Dumbledore, master of the world's mightiest force. The original Voldemort, stripped of followers and resources, now stands alone, surrounded on all sides by Dumbledore's army. Ryan grinned at Hermione's nod of approval. Even she had to admit his military school metaphor neatly explained everything they did end. Ured. Hermione listened closely, and within moments she had Ryan's explanation sorted out. So Voldemort had indeed escaped last semester, but a fragment of his soul was captured and now lived inside one of them. That fragment carried Voldemort's old curse, binding it to the Defense Against the Dark Arts professorship. In other words, they'd finally found someone to hold the post long-term, and it couldn't be replaced each year. Hermione shot to her feet, eyes shining with excitement. With Ryan here to back her up, no one would bat an eye at her sudden outburst. Relief washed over her. This term might actually be uneventful. Then she remembered her grades. As a second year, she hadn't personally endured the revolving door fiasco of Defense Against the Dark Arts teachers, but watching Ravenclaw's seniors struggle was enough to give her nightmares. She'd been dreading the disruption another new instructor would bring. But now, maybe having Voldemort's good fragment firmly installed as professor wasn't so terrible after all. Hermione turned to Ryan, an eager smile on her face. "So," she said, "you're actually teaching that class, aren't you?" Hermione paused, her mind racing. Why hadn't Ryan answered her question directly? And with that strange necklace of his, able to produce perfect duplicates, how could she be sure the young man before her was the real Ryan? He'd claimed he'd been in her room earlier because he sensed she was in danger, and in a way, it was true. His strength and consciousness had both shifted through space. It was only a matter of moments before he would fully reappear here, beside her. At Hermione's side, Ryan led the way to the luggage compartment, where suitcases and trunks were stowed. A few small witches, among them Hermione's roommate, Lisa Dupin, were peeking out curiously. As the train rattled on, Ryan raised his hand and wove a fine mist into the air. Hermione felt a tingle of magic she'd never seen before. Within the swirling vapor, two figures took shape, deep in conversation. Luna Lovegood, sitting quietly on a trunk, watched the mist with wide, bright eyes. "Look," she said softly, "it's Ron and Harry talking." She tilted her head, as if decoding a riddle. "You see, a wizard's heart has hair on it. A metaphor, I think. Voldemort must have used the Mind Stone to pull out his own heart, which is why he became so cold-blooded, just like that wizard in the old folktale. Then Dumbledore found Voldemort's heart, and well, that's how our professor was born." Hermione stared at her friend, stunned by the sudden, improbable theory. But if there was one person in the wizarding world who could leap from legend to reality without missing a beat, it was Luna Lovegood, daughter of Xenophilius, the most ardent believer in the tale of the three brothers. And somehow, Luna's wild ideas often held more truth than anyone expected. Luna realized that the tale of the wizard's hairy heart was one of the stories in the tales of Beetle the Bard, so it wasn't surprising that Harry and the others had drawn a connection. But Ryan couldn't help marveling at how perfectly Luna's summary echoed the significance of the soul fragment trapped in Voldemort's diary. That fragment was the last remnant of his conscience. Once he discarded it, a genuine monster was born. In the wizard's hairy heart, the proud wizard literally had his heart removed. As a result, he too grew cold and lost the capacity for love. The parallels were uncanny. Ryan looked at Luna with newfound respect. With a flick of his wand, the mist inside their compartment began to dissipate. The inky blackness outside the window gave way, and one by one, stars winked into view across the night sky. Chapter 71, A New Look at Luna. The Hogwarts Express rattled through the night, its windows reflecting nothing but inky darkness. Inside their compartment, Luna Lovegood settled onto the cushioned bench beside Ryan. She still felt a warm glow from his earlier compliment, and a little proud too, until something sudden occurred to her. "Ryan, could you step out for a moment?" she asked, trying to sound casual. He raised an eyebrow and pushed aside the door, peering out into the corridor. "Sure. Everything okay?" Luna hesitated, watching his expression for a telltale smile. I need to change clothes." In the next instant, she tapped him lightly on the chest with her fist, half in annoyance, half in giggly triumph, because she'd caught him smirking. "You knew I would," she accused. All right, Ryan laughed, rubbing his chest. "I remembered you'll need your uniform on as soon as we get to Hogwarts. I was just teasing." With that, he waved and stepped into the corridor. Luna took a deep breath, opened the door, and slipped out herself. The hallway was dotted with small clusters of students, some stretching their legs, others waiting for friends to finish changing in private. A few curious eyes followed her as she smoothed the front of her robes. She paused for a moment, her thoughts drifting back to home. Being raised by her father, Xenophilius Lovegood, after her mother's death, meant she'd spent most of her childhood under his watchful care. He'd never quite known how to be both parent and protector, so Luna had grown up mostly alone. Loneliness had been her constant companion, and out of it she had invented strange, wonderful creatures to keep her company. Now, adjusting her robes for the umpteenth time, Luna wondered what this new school year would bring. Friendships, adventures, or perhaps the discovery of a few more unseen creatures only she could imagine. Luna's odd reputation only seemed to grow. Her innocent, offhand remarks during the rare afternoons she spent with her father earned her the nickname Loony Luna, a moniker even Ron had overheard. Part of the problem was her appearance. Her father had no sense of fashion, and between her untidy robes and those large, silvery eyes that always seemed to stare off into a daydream, people concluded she must be mad. In truth, Luna was quite endearing, if you saw past her eccentric dress and dreamy gaze. The boys at school mocked her just to see her reaction. The girls rejected her as too slovenly. In the original timeline, the same thing happened once she joined Ravenclaw. Classmates dismissed her as a fantasist whenever she spoke of creatures no one else had ever heard of. To the studious witches and wizards of Ravenclaw House, Luna was exactly the sort of impetuous daydreamer they found most infuriating. All this had made her a little guarded, even neurotic. Very different from the carefree girl who just stepped off the carriage, the very Luna Ryan was about to meet. Yet beneath that guarded exterior remained the same quirky honesty and gentle spirit, if only someone took the time to see it. Ryan had managed to thaw Luna's frosty mood with equal parts charm and the perfect antidote, a few drops of soundproof bad elixir. He let out a relieved sigh at her softened expression and consciously slowed his racing thoughts to match her calmer pace. When he sensed she was ready, Luna tapped twice on the door of the adjoining compartment, quietly letting him know she'd changed her clothes. Ryan braced himself and pushed the door open. Even though he'd been prepared, he couldn't help staring in amazement. Without that peculiar dress, Luna looked like an entirely different person. Her hair was still wildly unbrushed, yet those tousled curls only highlighted her delicate features and wide, curious eyes. For a moment, Ryan simply took her in, but then he noticed her shoulders slump, a shadow of sadness passing over her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, settling beside her and gently taking her hand. Luna flexed her fingers once or twice, then sighed and looked away. "I'm a senior," she murmured, voice tinged with worry. "Father says only first years travel to Hogwarts by ship. I won't be on this journey with you." She bit her lip, blinking back uncertainty. "Does that mean we won't see each other in school? Friends don't let a few weeks of separation come between them, and you're so gifted with magic. Couldn't I just stay by your side?" Ryan couldn't help smiling as he reached for the tangled mass of her hair. He began to brush it slowly, capturing stray strands with careful patience. "I wish I could rewrite the rules," he said softly, "but even I can't bend Hogwarts regulations. Still, we'll find a way to keep in touch every day." As his fingers worked through the knots, Luna's smile returned, small but genuine, bringing back the spark of confidence that had been missing only moments before. Luna couldn't help but smile at Ryan's suggestion. If she looked more like herself, calm, composed, and a little less eccentric, perhaps the other Ravenclaws wouldn't dismiss her so readily. She let Ryan smooth back a stray strand of hair, feeling no resistance in her heart. Oddly, the gesture warmed her more than she expected. It reminded her in a strange way of her father's quiet kindness, familiar, yet distinct. Ryan slipped his hand into hers as they stepped onto the little boat. The current carried them down the dark tunnel and spat them out beside the castle's boathouse. They climbed the familiar stone steps, lanterns flickering overhead, until Professor McGonagall met them in the entrance hall. "Welcome," Professor McGonagall said briskly. "Mr. Ryan, Miss Lovegood, your small waiting rooms are this way." She led them through a side corridor and pushed open the door to a tidy, wooden-paneled hut. Inside, a single window looked out over the lake. "Rest here until I announce the sorting ceremony," she instructed, and then she left them alone. No sooner had the door closed behind McGonagall than Ginny Weasley bustled in, her red hair half tied back, eyes shining. "Luna!" she cried, waving so enthusiastically that Luna worried she might knock over a desk. Ginny stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Is that really you? You look wonderful." Luna slipped in front of the spot where Ryan stood. No one else could see him, and gave Ginny a small nod. "Thank you," she said softly. Ginny's mouth fell open. "Did you know Harry Potter stayed in our house last term? He came back here with Ron and that Malfoy boy, and you'll never believe the rumors that went around. They even—" Luna let Ginny chatter on, watching the excitement in her friend's eyes. For the first time since arriving, Luna felt a hopeful flutter in her chest. Perhaps this year wouldn't be so lonely after all. After our brief reunion at King's Cross, Ron caught up with us just long enough to exchange a few words. Then, once he boarded the Hogwarts Express, he and Harry slipped into the crowd of first years, disappearing down the corridor. Ginny, on the other hand, couldn't have seemed more at ease. Chatting eagerly with friends she'd known since childhood, she showed none of the shyness she sometimes wore around her brothers. Luna Lovegood, meanwhile, planted herself by Ryan's side, as if determined that Ginny not join their conversation, and Ryan simply remained silent, eyes fixed on the polished wood of the compartment. From Hermione's point of view, the train ride was downright boisterous. The compartment she shared with Luna was packed with younger witches from their dormitory, and Padma Patil's twin sister, Parvati, was in high spirits that morning. Though one or two of the girls were quietly content to listen, the rest filled the air with non-stop chatter, gossip about Diagon Alley, predictions for the new term, and most vocally, heated debate over Gilderoy Lockhart's sentencing. "I still can't believe they threw him in Azkaban for 10 years, declared Lisa Dupin, her hands fluttering in exasperation. "He only plagiarized a few travel tales and used a handful of memory charms. Is that really worth a decade biche? In bars?" Padma shrugged, offering a wry smile. "He does deserve punishment, no question there, but 10 years seems a bit excessive." Parvati nodded vigorously beside her. "Exactly. He's guilty, yes, but I thought Azkaban was reserved for much darker crimes." The compartment erupted again as the girls piled on their opinions. As Hermione settled onto her seat, book in hand, quill at the ready, she couldn't help but smile. After a summer apart, Hogwarts felt wonderfully alive. Hermione wanted to speak up, but having lived through enough alternate timelines, she knew better than to butt in. All she could manage was a few sympathetic murmurs and the occasional, reassuring squeeze of Ryan's hand. Ryan, for his part, looked thoroughly miserable. He understood that as long as he didn't try to hide, these gossip-obsessed girls would soon forget all about Gilderoy Lockhart. But that also meant he'd become the center of their attention, and never have a moment's peace. Fortunately, the topic soon shifted back to the new defense against the dark arts professor. "Ugh, I'm so torn," Lisa Dupin sighed, gently tracing the handsome features of the young man, Tom Riddle, portrayed in the latest issue of the Daily Prophet. "On the one hand, I want him and Dumbledore to be a couple. On the other, I really want Rita Skeeter's rumors to be nothing but hot air. So maybe there's still a chance for me?" The other girls all leaned in, nodding eagerly. Before long, they were happily swapping theories about other favorite ships, Deha, Roha, Rona, proving that when it comes to pairing off characters, plenty of young witches are more than willing to let their imaginations run wild. Chapter 72, Thestrals. Every September, after the Hogwarts Express pulls into Hogsmeade Station, first years cross the lake in little boats. That's how Harry remembers his debut voyage. In his second year, he and Ron arrived by flying Ford Anglia. The next 2 years, he'd simply assumed the students climbed into invisible carriages waiting on the station platform. It wasn't until his 5th year that Harry discovered the real transport, Thestrals, pale, skeletal winged horses only visible to those who have witnessed death. It wasn't for lack of opportunity that Harry learned so late. He wasn't an uninformed wizard. He had Ron's wild ideas and Hermione's encyclopedic knowledge at hand, plus 3 years of Hagrid's care of magical creatures lessons, and Hagrid was one of his closest friends. Yet until recently, the very name Thestral had never crossed Harry's lips. The truth was rooted in superstition. In the wizarding world, Thestrals were viewed as omens of ill fortune, spectral harbingers of disaster for anyone who glimpsed them. Even Hagrid, who delighted in dangerous and magnificent beasts, had been reluctant to introduce such a feared creature when he first became the Care of Magical Creatures professor. Only after proving himself to the Ministry and to the students did he finally share the Thestrals' true nature, and at last Harry understood the secret behind Hogwarts' silent, shadowy steeds. That bucking incident with the hippogriff happened simply because Hagrid had warned everyone not to antagonize it. Hippogriffs are fiercely proud, and if you ignore proper etiquette, you leave yourself wide open for a nasty reaction. Hagrid never expected anyone to deliberately snub one after his clear instructions, yet all it took was one reckless student to provoke it into overturning. As for Thestrals, they were completely absent from Kettleburn's bestiary, and it wasn't until 5 years after Harry's death that Hagrid began to teach about them. These skeletal, winged horses are invisible to anyone who hasn't witnessed and truly accepted the death of an intelligent being. In the original world line, Harry didn't see them right away after Cedric's death. Only after he'd taken the time to come to terms with what had happened did they appear to him. This is also why no one realized that the carriages to Hogsmeade are drawn by Thestrals. Most young witches and wizards, not yet familiar with the finality of death, simply can't perceive them. To the young wizard who caught sight of them, Thestrals were the stuff of nightmares. They stood gaunt and skeletal, wings like tattered bat membranes stretching wide, and heads that might as well have been dragon-forged. Their eyes were blank, pupilless white orbs that seemed to stare straight through you. In the wizarding community, to hear voices no one else could hear, or to glimpse things no one else could see, was an ill omen, an invitation to gossip or worse. That is why the boy never spoke of what he'd witnessed. Most likely, it was this dreadful reputation that lay behind Luna Lovegood's ostracism in this timeline. She would slip into the kitchens under cover of darkness, emerging clutching chunks of raw, bloody meat. Then she'd journey out to feed her Thestrals, hurling that flesh into the air, watching it vanish in a flurry of snapping jaws and hungry shrieks. To anyone unaware of the creature's existence, Luna looked as though she were wading through gore, her robes drenched crimson. And her eyes, large, round, and a rare silver white, only made the scene more surreal. This was not a harmless eccentricity or simple superstition. It was something that chilled the spine and drew fearful whispers wherever Luna went. Ryan stepped down from the carriage and paused when Hermione looked at the empty shafts in front of it. "What's pulling this, exactly?" she asked, eyeing the 2 polished wooden poles that should have been hitched to horses. He hesitated, torn between simply explaining or demonstrating his own method of animating the carriage. Hermione must have sensed his uncertainty, because, she added, "I mean, why fit a pair of shafts if there aren't any horses or other beasts attached to them?" At that, Ryan blinked and wisely decided that a brief explanation would have to do, for now. He clambered back into the open-top carriage, where Hermione was already settled along with Harry and Ron. Across the platform, Draco Malfoy, Gregory Goyle, Vincent Crabbe, and Pansy Parkinson were boarding the adjacent coach, smirking at the gathering crowd. "Invisible horses?" Ron muttered under his breath. Harry, however, stepped forward with a grin. "Well, long time no see, Ryan. And Hermione, too. Thanks again for the gift you sent over the summer." He glanced at Ryan with eagerness. "I've got so many questions about what we did back at your place. Mind if I pick your brains a bit?" Hermione shot Ryan an encouraging look. While Harry and Ron settled in beside them, she leaned over and whispered, "I still think it's some sort of alchemical invention. After all, Dumbledore's an alchemist of the highest order. He even collaborates with Nicholas Flamel. You didn't hear?" The headmaster showed up at Harry's birthday party this year, just to demonstrate a new transmutation spell. As steam hissed from the locomotive and Professor McGonagall called for final boarding, the students chattered excitedly. Hogwarts awaited, and with it, new surprises from both the magical and the alchemical worlds. Ron could barely contain his grin, as if he were the one who'd received Dumbledore's gift and just celebrated his own birthday. After all, not only had Dumbledore given Harry that magical deluminator, but Harry had also invented an entirely new spell under Dumbledore's guidance. No wonder Ron felt entitled to a share of the glory. Of course, Ryan saw right through him. Ron could be a bit dense. He didn't realize that the magical trap he'd discovered last semester was a simple diversion compared to the vault Harry and he had just cracked open, the very place Voldemort hid his most precious relics. A little swagger? Totally expected. Harry, though, had no idea Ryan was silently judging Ron's bluster. As Ron rattled on about the deluminator and the new spell, Harry caught a subtle wink from Ryan. Ron, misreading the gesture as encouragement, smiled even wider. Yes, he thought. They're my friends. Hermione's my friend, Ryan's my roommate, and I told them everything about the Philosopher's Stone last year. Buoyed by this realization, he plunged into a blow-by-blow of his and Harry's, and even Draco's, summer holiday. If he hadn't caught himself, he might have even spilled the beans on Regulus. Finally, Harry cleared his throat. All right, Ron, he said gently, how about we tune into Ryan's thoughts for a moment? He might actually know what this carriage is up to. He shot Ryan an imploring look. Ryan merely raised an eyebrow, but in that silence, they all knew he held more answers than Ron's endless monologue ever would. Harry hadn't realized just how careful Ron could be. He watched in sudden alarm as Ron teetered on the brink of revealing Regulus's secrets, and jumped in to stop him. Ron clicked his tongue in annoyance. Once again, he felt Harry was stealing the spotlight and undermining his carefully cultivated reputation. Ryan and Hermione weren't exactly outsiders, but they were friends, and Ron wasn't about to let them think he'd willingly given up his moment. What if Harry's perpetual modesty cost them the credit they deserved? Ron remembered all too well how the previous year he'd been the one boasting about rescuing the Philosopher's Stone. He'd told everyone it was his daring and Harry's quick thinking that had saved the day, only for Harry to brush off every compliment. Ron had gone silent then, but the sting of being overshadowed remained. Still, Harry had been right to guard Regulus's secret. At Ron's sudden shift from irritation to relief, Harry realized his friend had misread the situation. There was no competition here, only loyalty. With that settled, Harry leaned forward, straining to hear what came next. Ryan raised his wand, and under the moon's pale light, the air before them seemed to waver. This, he said softly, is a night thestral. With a practiced flick, he revealed the creature, a skeletal, ethereal horse with leathery wings and hollow eyes. Only those who have truly witnessed death and accepted it can see them. The night thestral stood bathed in silvery light, its presence both haunting and strangely beautiful. As Harry, Ron, and Hermione peered at it in awe, Ryan's face held a mixture of pride and quiet gratitude for those who could finally understand what he'd kept hidden and why it had to remain a secret. Thestrals! This creature spells nothing but disaster, worse than a mere bad omen, Ron gasped in horror. In the next heartbeat, he and Harry stood frozen, eyes locked on the apparition before them. At the very center of Xuanyuan stood a nightmarish horse. Its flesh had seemingly vanished, leaving pure ebony hide stretched tight over protruding bones. Every vertebra and rib was sharply defined as if carved from onyx. The beast's hollow eye sockets bore into them like twin voids, promising only darkness and dread. Chapter 73. Ron's Scream Knight had fallen by the time the ghostly row of carriages glided across the Hogwarts grounds, the towering castle rising in silhouette against the dark sky. Down below, the black lake mirrored the lantern light of the little boats, their reflections trembling like spirits on water. Beyond them, the forbidden forest yawned, its edges shrouded in shadow and punctuated by the faint, distant howls of wolves deep within. Inside one carriage, a group of second-year students, still uneasy at the unfamiliar journey, huddled together, trading rumors about new professors and upcoming classes in a bid to calm their nerves. Then, without warning, a scream so shrill it felt like fire in the air split the silence. It was as if someone had tossed a torch into a dry stack of kindling. Suddenly every heart pounded, and every throat tightened. Almost at once, screams erupted from carriage after carriage. What was that? A boy cried. A werewolf from the forbidden forest. The ghosts of the shrieking shack, another shouted. Panic spread like wildfire. But through the clamor, one familiar voice cut in, sharp and amused. Oi, Lee Jordan, guess what that first scream sounded like? Lee leaned forward, curiosity winning over fear. Tell us, he called. A third student grinned. That, my friends, was Ron's scream when he thinks his favorite dolls turned into a spider. Laughter rippled through the compartment, and the tension dissolved. After all, it really did sound a lot like Ron in full-blown terror over a harmless toy. The carriage rocked and creaked beneath them, the faint smell of mold and straw drifting through the air. Fred Weasley nudged his twin brother, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. Come on, George. Don't be such a wimp. There's nothing wrong with a spider in here. He reached down and let a tiny spider crawl across his palm. A chorus of high-pitched shrieks erupted from the girls in the next carriage as the creature scuttled into view. George seized the moment. With a quick flick of his wand, he cast Sonorous on his own voice, amplifying his delighted laughter so it boomed across the field. The shrieks died away, replaced by scattered applause. Well done, Fred and George, someone cheered. Red-faced, Ron Weasley spun around. This is Percy's doing. I just know it, he muttered, glaring fiercely at his older brother's empty seat. Don't drag my name into this, Wan, Fred shot back, winking at George. Harry exchanged a look with Hermione. Ron was about to blow his top. Before he could object, Ryan, sitting beside him, whispered the last word of a mutismo charm. Ron's angry retort fizzled into an indignant pout. Harry said nothing. Hermione looked away in solidarity. They all understood. Some rages were best left to burn themselves out. Moments later, the carriages crested a gentle rise. Below them stood a pair of tall, wrought-iron gates, each pillar topped by a winged boar. A long, winding drive stretched between ancient oaks, leading straight toward the castle. The Thestrals beneath them lifted their heads and quickened their pace, as if they, too, sensed the grandeur ahead. Through breaks in the trees, corner towers and soaring battlements came into view, their spires piercing the sky. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. A voice drifted from a nearby carriage. There he is, Ron Weasley, the one who screamed. A ripple of laughter followed, but Ron, cheeks still glowing, refused to look back. Ahead lay the castle's great hall, and with it, the start of another school year. Isn't he the bane of magical creature poachers, one of the 3 musketeers who helped bring you-know-who down? And yet he's afraid of spiders? It must be thanks to Harry Potter. I wish I were Harry's friend. As the students clambered off the bus and filed toward the castle, all eyes turned to Ron Weasley. Fingers pointed, whispers rippled through the crowd, and for the first time, Ron despised his flaming red hair for standing out so conspicuously. Ron, you all right? Came a silky drawl. Draco Malfoy and his cronies swept past the steps into Hogwarts, slowing as they passed Ron and his friends. Fine, Ron muttered, glancing over his shoulder. I just saw those blasted Thestrals again. Nightmare creatures. Totally wrecked my nerves. I'm doomed this term. He dropped his gaze, but then tensed. A raven-haired girl in a Ravenclaw cloak was staring at him, her face lost in shadow. Ron's sharp eyes flicked to the badge pinned over her heart, the emblem of the Toothill Tornadoes. What are you looking at? He snapped, bristling. The girl didn't budge. Ron jabbed a thumb at her badge. Toothill Tornadoes supporters, eh? They were nobodies until the team started winning. Everyone jumps on the bandwagon at the first sign of success. She met his glare silently, and in that charged instant, Ron realized that everyone had an opinion about the Weasleys these days, just as much as they did about Harry Potter himself. Chujang plays for the Chudley Cannons. She's a year older than us, and has been a Tornadoes fan since she was 6. I ran into her in the common room, Hermione said suddenly. She was raving about the Tornadoes, back when hardly anyone paid them any attention. Harry frowned. I remember Captain Johnny once saying she'd have made a tremendous seeker if it weren't for me. Chujang was staring straight at Harry, her expression unreadable. She'd be a perfect seeker for Ravenclaw someday, Ryan added. Just look at how the captain reads the game. Fantastic, Ron muttered under his breath. Everything's my fault. Nearby, Draco Malfoy was being pulled away by Pansy Parkinson. Crabbe and Goyle flanked him like bodyguards before melting into the crowd. Chujang slipped off in the opposite direction. Hermione, Harry, Ron, Ryan, and I climbed the broad stone steps, pushed through the massive oak doors, and entered a wide, torchlit vestibule. A magnificent marble staircase spiraled upward, and to our right the towering doors of the great hall stood open. We followed the throng of students inside. "Ron, you all right?" I asked. I jolted to my feet the moment a piercing scream echoed down the corridor. Students scattered in every direction, their voices rising in a frantic chorus. I rushed forward, heart pounding. Just as the prefects began folding origami cranes and sending them fluttering overhead, a Hogwarts signal meant to calm everyone to say there was no real danger. "It's nothing," someone called. "Professor Lupin, he's on his way." But Ron, pale and shaking, pushed through the crowd toward us. "I saw Thestrals," he blurted, voice cracking. "Thestrals," I repeated, bewildered. "What are you talking about?" The others clustered around. Hermione, her brow furrowed, Padma and Parvati exchanging anxious looks, Dean and Seamus pausing mid-step at the Gryffindor table, Neville and Hannah whispering at theirs. Ron swallowed hard. "They're back, the skeleton-winged horses we only hear about in legends. Dragon-like heads, bony bodies, pearl-white eyes, no flesh on them, just black skin stretched tight over bone, and massive, razor-sharp fangs." "Amazing," Parvati muttered, but her voice trembled with uncertainty. "They're the ones who pull the carriages up from Hogsmeade to Hogwarts," Ron continued. He lifted his hand, as if warding off an approaching beast. "I saw them at the station this morning." Neville's face turned ashen. "I've seen them too," he whispered. "You only see Thestrals once you've witnessed death, really understood it. I first saw them when my grandfather died." A cold hush fell over us all. The hall felt suddenly too large, the vaulted ceiling too high. Every orb of light seemed to flicker. Then Lavender Brown let out a blood-curdling scream, the same cry Ron had given. Students leapt from their seats, chairs clattered as they stumbled backward. I scanned the crowd, looking for any sign of the ghostly creatures, but all I saw were terrified faces, frozen in disbelief. Whatever Ron and Neville had seen, whatever horror had followed them here, was enough to leave the entire school reeling. And as the echoes of that second scream died away, I knew this was only the beginning of something far darker than any of us had ever imagined. She was just as fascinated by superstitions as Ron, and just as good at putting them into practice. No wonder, Anthony thought wryly, that in the original timeline Lavender Brown had chased Ron so obsessively. But here, it was all just old wives' tales. None of those so-called unlucky signs were really harmful. In fact, the creatures under discussion were clever and even helpful. Anthony, who hadn't had an excuse to brag in ages, suddenly sat up straighter. "You know my cousin Tina Goldstein, right? She's engaged to Newt Scamander. Yes, the famous magizoologist himself. Thanks to her, I've practically become an expert on magical beasts. I've read every word of his fantastic beasts and where to find them. Even if these creatures aren't actually cursed, they're still ruinous for your reputation," Ron groaned, burying his face in his arms on the table. "After today, my chances of surviving this semester just went down the drain." Chapter 74. Riddle's Charm. Ron's sullen silence was enough to halt Lavender Brown and Anthony Goldstein in mid-argue. The two of them exchanged worried glances, then both clamped their mouths shut. At that moment, the first-year students were already filing into the Great Hall, lining up before the sorting hat and waiting nervously for their turns. "Look, there's Ginny!" Harry exclaimed, seizing the chance to snap Ron out of his funk. "Ginny? Oh, right, my sister." Ron's face brightened instantly. "She's brilliant. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if she ended up in Ravenclaw like me." Nearby, McConnell leaned toward Michael, Ginny's ex from another timeline, and whispered through a shy grin, "Is that the adorable redhead?" His dark skin flushed pink at the corners of his eyes. "That's her," Ron said proudly. Ryan shot Michael a teasing look. "Did you know Ginny was tinkering with toy broomsticks at 6? She was born to be a Quidditch star." McCona went on to sing Ginny's praises, and Michael's cheeks grew redder by the second. But then McCona's brow furrowed as he took in the witch standing beside Ginny. "Wait, who's that little girl next to her? She looks familiar, almost like she's completely bonkers." The sorting hat ceremony hadn't even begun, yet already the Weasley family had everyone's attention. With charm and mystery on display, it seemed this year's batch of first years would be ones to remember. "Her name's Luna," Ron said in astonishment. "My sister was telling me about her last night." Harry looked up, intrigued. "You mean the girl who lives next door to the Lovegoods?" The one whose house looks like it's made of scrap metal and odd knickknacks? Exactly, Ron shook his head. But what I want to know is, why do they all call her the crazy girl? Harry frowned. It seemed unfair. Luna didn't strike him as mad at all. Her pale, silvery hair and wide, silvery blue eyes were striking, almost ethereal, and she carried herself with a calm, dreamy grace. On looks alone, she was unquestionably pretty. I'm not sure, Ron admitted. Most days she's even more eccentric, in that wild, unbrushed mess Hermione had last year before she got her hair under control, and she pins the most ridiculous things to her robes, beer bottle corks, leftover carrot tops, bits of string. It's like stepping into a vegetable patch. Ron's eyes lit up at the memory, oblivious to how unflattering his description sounded. Harry cast a quick glance at Hermione, who was busy fussing over her notes and didn't seem to have caught a word. What if we don't all end up in the same house? Ron fretted, tugging at Harry's sleeve. Harry turned back to look at Hermione, still completely absorbed in her own world, and couldn't help but smile. Even if Luna was a little odd, at least she'd be too polite to ignore them completely. Harry noticed that nearly everyone in the Great Hall was staring at the staff table. Curious, he glanced over and froze. 2 empty seats had appeared where there had been none before. This year, only 1 teaching post had opened up. Why 2 new professors? The first man to take a seat was unmistakable, Professor Remus Lupin, dignified despite the faint lines etched around his eyes. But it was the second newcomer who stole every onlooker's breath. He moved with such effortless poise that Harry's pulse skittered. Dark hair, high cheekbones, and skin so pale it could have been carved from marble, this Tom Riddle seemed a world away from the snarling monster of legend. Harry could not for the life of him connect this impeccably groomed gentleman with Voldemort. Could the Dark Lord really have reinvented himself so completely? Every step Riddle took exuded calm confidence and startling charisma. Harry found himself daydreaming. This face was far more striking than any of the famous beauties he'd heard about. His heart thumped in his chest. "Mom," he almost whispered to himself, "I'm in love." A heady blend of excitement and dread surged through him. This was the first time Harry had felt such a powerful crush. And oh, F all people, his object of affection was now his professor. A blush warmed his cheeks as he wondered how he'd ever concentrate in class again. For the first time, Harry had both someone he adored and a dreamy, handsome teacher. But why? Why did these 2 joys have to be the same person? Harry couldn't shake the odd conversations swirling around the table, talk of a little witch and some young wizards, and inexplicably, he felt a strange kinship with Tom Riddle. Of course, that notion repulsed him. After all, Riddle was nothing more than Voldemort's memory, and his very presence usually made Harry's skin crawl. Yet this time felt different, as if he'd discovered a blood brother he never knew he had. Riddle must have sensed Harry's gaze. He turned smoothly and offered Harry a wide, knowing smile. The moment Riddle's eyes met his, pandemonium broke out between the Ravenclaws and the Gryffindors. Screams and jeers ricocheted around the Great Hall. "He's looking at me! Ninian, do I look weird? Stop staring! What kind of monster is he? Stupid lion! Freak! Nerd Academy! Loser!" Prefects Penelope Clearwater and Percy Weasley darted back and forth, desperately trying and utterly failing to calm the 2 houses. But the insults only grew louder, and the tables shook with shouts of rage and fear. Harry fixed Riddle with a glare. Unfazed by the chaos he had ignited, Riddle simply shrugged, as if every shout and insult were exactly the response he'd been waiting for. The curious warmth that had briefly blossomed in Harry's chest now vanished, replaced by the familiar cold steel of revulsion. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table, absently stirring his pumpkin juice. His mind, however, was elsewhere. He couldn't shake one nagging question. Where had the Ravenclaw ghost, Lady Grey, gone? Every school record from the past years confirmed she'd never missed a day haunting the castle, yet now she seemed to have vanished. Nearly headless Nick rose from his seat and drifted over, as if sensing Harry's curiosity. "She's been acting very strange," he murmured. "For the last few days, she's camped out by the Ravenclaw statue in the tower, staring at Rowena's crown like she's under a spell. She barely moves." Nick paused, looking worried. "You know, she's always been fascinated by that crown, studied it, written about it. But this is more than fascination. Obsession. Harry frowned. Obsession? Before he could say more, Ron and their fellow Gryffindors began shouting at the Ravenclaws across the hall, reigniting their long-standing rivalry over last week's Quidditch match. Voices rose, insults were traded, and the room crackled with tension. Quiet! Professor McGonagall's sharp command cut through the clamor like a knife. Standing at the head of the great hall, she looked every bit the ferocious lioness, lips pursed, eyes blazing, as she swept her gaze over both houses. Instantly, the students fell silent, the only sound the crackle of torches along the walls. Harry leaned closer to Nick, determined to learn more about Lady Grey's strange disappearance and the mysterious pull the crown held over her. Professor McGonagall paused in the center of the great hall. Carefully, she set a simple three-legged stool before the wide-eyed first-year students and placed atop it a battered, patched wizard's hat, its brim frayed, its fabric mottled and dusty. A hush fell over the hall as every eye fixed on the shabby piece of headwear. Even the portraits along the walls seemed to lean in, curious. Just as the Sorting Hat was about to burst into its familiar opening verse, a clear voice rang out, "If I may have your attention." For the first time in Hogwarts history, Albus Dumbledore rose to speak before the hat could sing. The hall held its breath. Dumbledore's twinkling eyes swept over the assembly. Not a single voice answered his summons. Only Tom Riddle, seated to one side, lifted his goblet in a polite greeting. Dumbledore smiled gently at Riddle, then turned back to the students. "You may already have read this in the Daily Prophet, but I feel it is fitting to announce it in person. This year, we are delighted to welcome not one, but two new members to our faculty, both of whom will be joining us as professors of defense against the dark arts." A ripple of excitement passed through the hall as curious whispers broke the silence, and Dumbledore took his seat, leaving the tattered Sorting Hat perched on its stool, waiting to decide each young witch or wizard's house. Chapter 75, The Sorting Hat Song. The great hall stretched out before them like an ocean of pointed black hats. Each of the 4 long tables overflowed with students, their faces glowing in the flickering light of thousands of enchanted candles suspended overhead. Silver-shimmering ghosts drifted serenely through the air. As soon as Professor Dumbledore concluded his opening remarks, a chorus of surprised chatter rippled around the room. The gathered students could hardly believe their ears. There would be 2 young wizards sharing the same prestigious honor that night. Slytherin's table reacted with the most conspicuous mixture of awe and unease. From the moment Dumbledore announced it, they stared at Tom Riddle with wide-eyed reverence, tempered by fear. The notion that another student would challenge Riddle's claim stirred near outrage in their ranks, until Harry Potter realized the truth behind their shock. In Britain's tightly interwoven wizarding community, especially among pure-blood families, relatives and alliances ran deep. Inevitably, prominent houses like the Malfoys would have connections to the young Voldemort. Harry still didn't know exactly what kind of man Voldemort had become, but he knew this much. One need only look at Professor Quirrell's shattered fate to understand the cost of crossing the Dark Lord. The pure-blood Slytherins wore guarded expressions, understandably so, since he seemed perfectly willing to sacrifice his own servants' lives and might even take pleasure in unleashing his wrath. Better to keep their distance than risk being caught up in a reckless plot. No wonder every Slytherin whispered the same warning to one another. Tom Riddle was Voldemort incarnate. In the Great Hall, Professor Dumbledore cleared his throat. Pale blue eyes flicking over the assembled students behind his half-moon spectacles, he instantly commanded silence. Nearly every student craned forward, eager to hear what he would say next. Only the ghosts drifted through the hush, unconcerned. What went on in Hogwarts could hardly be hidden from them. Dumbledore's voice rang out, steady and warm. "I am very pleased to announce that Remus Lupin will be joining us next year as Assistant Professor of Defense against the Dark Arts." He glanced toward Lupin, who stood and acknowledged the hall with a polite nod. A smattering of polite, if half-hearted applause followed. Ryan, watching from the Slytherin table, wasn't surprised. Lupin certainly looked more presentable than tales told him, far less shabby than in some versions of the story. But with Tom Riddle's uncanny charm dominating every conversation, genuine enthusiasm was in short supply. Professor Snape, head of Slytherin House, sat at the long staff table, his cold, grayish-yellow features twisted with barely concealed anger and disgust as he fixed a stare on Professor Lupin. Rumor had it that Lupin was the new assistant, or perhaps even Tom Riddle's latest protege, and yet the Slytherins dared not applaud. After all, Lupin wasn't the Dark Lord himself, and even if he were, no one wanted to risk the wrath of the headmaster. Harry, Ron, and Draco, however, needed no encouragement. They jumped to their feet, clapping with such enthusiasm that other students, curious about this new assistant, joined in. The applause swelled until even the most hesitant clapped in time. Dumbledore beamed at the rising roar and waited patiently until it reached a crescendo. Then he raised his hands for silence. "I give you Tom Riddle, who will be teaching Defense Against the Dark Arts this semester, and I trust for many semesters to come. I believe you are all well acquainted with him." No sooner had the headmaster spoken than the Great Hall exploded in thunderous applause once more. Slytherins and students from the other houses alike cheered as Tom Riddle stood and acknowledged them with a courteous nod, ready to begin his tenure at Hogwarts. The applause thundered through the Great Hall, so deafening that even the floating candles flickered wildly overhead. As the echoes finally died away, Professor Dumbledore stood and beamed at the assembled students. "Let us continue with the sorting," he said, his eyes twinkling. "I fear our first years may grow impatient after standing for so long." A soft murmur ran through the new students, and somewhere near the back, Ron Weasley grumbled under his breath, "We've been here ages. I'm starving." Lisa Duping, perched at the front, shot him a sharp look. Not only had Ron failed to applaud for her idol, Tom Riddle, but now he was complaining at the exact worst moment. Just then, the sorting hat atop its stool gave a sudden, impatient wobble, as if to remind everyone that the real magic was about to begin. A thin crack appeared along the brim of the ragged old hat, as if a mouth opening, and a deep, resonant voice began to sing. "Don't be fooled by my simple guise, for I am the enchanted hat of Gryffindor. Woven with the wisdom of 4 great founders, their thoughts and dreams live on in every stitch. Now, listen to our song. From the misty bogs strode brave Gryffindor, by the gentle riverside dwelled keen Ravenclaw, in sunlit valleys tended kind Hufflepuff, and in shadowed marshes schemed sly Slytherin. 4 realms, 4 hearts, 4 distinct gifts, courage, wit, loyalty, ambition. Though each grew in a different place, their shared vision built a single school, Hogwarts, cradle of magical learning, and home to 4 noble houses. Gryffindor calls to the bold of heart, Ravenclaw to minds that yearn for knowledge, Hufflepuff to those who value hard work and faithfulness, Slytherin to seekers of power and cunning. Come, put me on your head, fear not, and do not tremble. Let me peer into your very thoughts and reveal the house where you belong." With that final note, the Great Hall hissed to silence for a heartbeat, then burst into warm, enthusiastic applause. Professor McGonagall waited until the applause died down, then unrolled a long strip of parchment. "When I call your name, come forward, place the sorting hat on your head, and sit on the stool. Wait for the hat to announce your house before joining your classmates at the table." She cleared her throat. "Jason Astra!" A small boy stepped forward, trembling so badly his knees rattled. He lowered himself onto the stool, and the sorting hat was plopped onto his head. Everyone leaned in. After a moment, the old battered hat shouted, "Hufflepuff!" Cheers erupted from the yellow and black table as Jason hurried off, grinning with relief. Nearby, Ron leaned toward Harry, whispering, "A whole year to write that song? Honestly, I'd expect it to warn Harry. After all, it's been in the headmaster's office and has access to all the best secrets." Seamus, who'd been watching them, raised an eyebrow. 1 year? The hat's brim contains all the founder's thoughts. This is just improvisation. What warning could it give? Caught off guard, Ron waved his fork at Seamus. "Hey, stop eavesdropping on me." Seamus shrugged. "You were talking loud enough for half the hall, and knowing you, you were probably about to brag." Before Ron could fire back, Seamus turned away, leaving Ron scowling over his pumpkin pasties as the next student was called. Hermione, who was seated with Ryan a short distance away, couldn't help but nod when Seamus muttered, "Ron's so loud." "Luna Lovegood," Professor McGonagall called. "Ravenclaw." Harry's ears pricked up at the mention of the loony girl Ron had just teased. He turned to watch Luna striding calmly toward the Ravenclaw table. She looked nothing like the scatterbrained oddball her nickname suggested. Instead, she seemed almost serenely confident. After all, even the bravest first years usually trembled at their first sorting. Harry blinked in surprise when Luna reached the Ravenclaw bench and slid into the one empty seat beside Ryan, who was sitting just a few chairs down from Harry himself. The seat hadn't been vacant a moment ago. Clearly Ryan had saved it for her, which could only mean that Luna Lovegood and Ryan were already acquainted. Chapter 76 depressed Harry. The Great Hall buzzed with excitement as the sorting ceremony continued, but Harry barely noticed. From where he sat at the staff table, he could feel a storm of tension swirling around Ryan. Hermione, perched beside him, was unnaturally still, so calm, in fact, that Harry was reminded of Mrs. Weasley on the brink of a full-blown scolding. Luna Lovegood, on the other hand, seemed utterly oblivious. She leaned toward Ryan, chattering away about some little sister of hers who'd just joined Ravenclaw. "My sister's a Ravenclaw now. Ginny Weasley, you know, our own little sister," Luna gushed. Harry watched her bright eyes and shaking head, wondering what planet Luna was on. Before he could puzzle it out, a chorus of voices erupted from the Gryffindor table. Ron, Percy, Fred, and George shouted in unison, drawing every eye in the hall. Ginny's cheeks went bright red. She looked up at the Ravenclaw table as if seeing it for the first time. Her next move was impulsive. She tore to her feet and strode across the floor. Harry's heart lurched. "No, Ginny, wait," he called desperately, but she was already halfway over. She stopped before an empty seat. "Why is there an open spot next to me?" she asked aloud, frowning. "When did they save a chair? What did I forget?" Harry's blood ran cold. He managed a strained smile and turned to chat casually with the Weasley woman sitting beside him, determined to hide his panic. He caught sight of Ryan's lips curling upward in a triumphant smirk. So it was true. Ryan had somehow rigged this, placed Harry in Ravenclaw just to get at him. Harry sank lower in his seat, heart heavier than ever. At that moment, Hogwarts felt less like home and more like a battlefield, and he was stuck right in the middle of it. Ron, in his usual clueless way, didn't seem to grasp Ginny's real feelings about sitting so close to Harry. With one hand flat on the table, he shoved Harry nearly off his stool, never once noticing the way Ginny's fists curled tighter beneath the linen. He kept lavishly praising her. "Honestly, Ginny, you're incredible. I'm proud to call you my sister." Harry stared, half in disbelief. Was this even the same Ron Weasley he'd grown up with? On Harry's other side, Percy sat quietly. Even though Ginny's cheeks were burning red, he hadn't elbowed his way into their conversation the way Ron just had. Percy seemed to understand instinctively that his sister and Harry needed a little room. Harry braced himself, almost certain that at any moment Ginny would draw her wand and send Ron flying across the hall. He kept one eye on her as Dumbledore rose once more to address the tables. Ron glanced up, his hunger finally trumping his desire to annoy his sister. He released his grip on Harry's stool, picked up knife and fork, and stared hungrily at the golden platter before him. Across the table, Harry noticed the veins pulsing at Ginny's temples, bright red under her skin, but she said nothing, at least for now. Albus Dumbledore, seated at the staff table, swept his arms wide and beamed at the gathered students. "I have only 2 words for you," he announced in his rich, resonant voice that carried across the great hall. "Eat!" The moment he spoke, every empty plate before them overflowed with steaming dishes. To Harry's left, a sudden growl erupted. It was Ron. In a blur of motion, his hand darted forward like an arrow loose from its bow, spearing a thick slice of steak. He never paused to cut it with a knife. He simply clamped down with his teeth. A spray of meat juices arced through the air, splattering across Michael's face, who had been leaning over to whisper something to Ginny. For an instant, the hall fell silent, as though frozen in disbelief. Michael sat motionless, meat juice dripping down his cheek. Then Ron tore into a huge bite of mashed potatoes and proclaimed triumphantly, "Harry, I'm alive again!" The hall seemed to exhale all at once, students blinking as if waking from a dream. Ginny ducked her head, hiding her reddened face in her arms. Michael, finally tearing his gaze from Ron, realized he was smeared in gravy and steak drippings. He wiped at his cheek, grimacing, and stole a glance toward Ginny, hoping she hadn't noticed his unexpected and decidedly undignified battle with dinner. Seeing Ginny duck her head, Harry let out a quiet sigh of relief. Neville and the others, still reeling from what had just happened, tried to hide their shock by eating as fast as they could. "Ginny, eat something," Ron called, holding out a fried chicken drumstick. He slipped around Harry and offered it to his sister, who remained curled inward, her face buried in her elbow. His own comfortably full stomach reminded him to check on her. "I'm not hungry," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ron, Ginny's just overwhelmed," Harry said. "Go ahead and finish your dinner. She'll be fine." Freed of his self-appointed task, Ron eagerly resumed eating. Ginny lifted her head and offered Harry a small pie, grateful smile. Unfortunately, Michael Corner, sitting nearby, completely misread her expression. He blinked, beamed back at her with a flawless, Lockhart-inspired grin, and flashed all 8 of his pearly whites. Ginny almost gagged. "Ginny?" Harry set down his half-eaten pie, concern etched on his face. "Are you okay?" "It's nothing," she said, though her discomfort was obvious. Then she frowned and nodded toward Michael. "Who's that dark-skinned boy over there? He's giving me that cheeseball smile, like the idiot Lockhart mum keeps complaining about." Harry glanced at Michael. "That's Michael Corner. He's my roommate, and your brother's too." Ginny arched an eyebrow. Harry shrugged. "I guess he thinks you like him. Michael's, well, he's not the best at reading signals." "Fantastic," Ginny muttered. "Would you mind telling him to cut it out?" Harry offered a reassuring grin. "Consider it done." Ron's personality really was just like Ron's, always blurting out the most unexpected comments or doing something outrageously attention-seeking. Take today, for example. While Roger droned on about the history of Quidditch, Ron started spouting complete nonsense just to liven things up. Ginny's pale cheeks flushed again under Harry's steady gaze. She wondered if she'd been too forward. Talking to Harry still felt strange, as if she weren't quite used to it yet. Time dripped by in that awkward silence, each second stretching far longer than it should have. Finally, the empty plates on the golden serving stand vanished, and with Ron's triumphant belch, they were instantly replaced by desserts. Chocolate cake, Ginny's favorite, appeared in a blink. "Ginny, want some?" Ron asked, swiveling his head toward his sister. She lowered her eyes and took another sip of pumpkin juice from her tall goblet, the cold sweetness doing nothing to still her nerves. When she finally answered, it came out as a choked cough. "Oh, no thanks. It's so hot today. Ice cream sounds better." "All right, suit yourself," Ron said in an almost tender tone, one she'd never heard from him before. Then Harry cleared his throat to fill the silence. "By the way, Ron," he said, "what do you think Professor Flitwick will cover in Defense Against the Dark Arts this year?" Judging by the textbook Professor Riddle assigned, this looked more like Muggle studies than Defense Against the Dark Arts. Were they really going to squeeze it into their second year in place of Dada? Harry caught the odd look on Ron's face and realized he'd stumbled onto a topic Ron cared about more than almost anything else. Well, of course, Ron would worry himself sick over Hagrid's magical creature lessons, yet wouldn't bat an eye at Defense Against the Dark Arts. But Ron didn't rise to the bait. He shoved a mouthful of pudding into his mouth, chewed furiously, then swallowed and mumbled, "You're spot on, Harry. Anyone who claims Professor Riddle's pocketing fees through back channels is just jealous of him." "Ronald, did you just say you know something about Professor Riddle?" Lisa Dupin, who'd been sitting across the table, stared at him, her eyes wide with surprise. Harry wasn't sure whether to feel proud or mortified. Ron's momentarily creepy expression had vanished, but Lisa's sudden question had every girl at the table swiveling in their seats to see what was going on. Chapter 77, Harry's Curse. Rita Skeeter's expose on Tom Riddle and his book, Magic in the Muggle World, was supposed to trigger an uproar. After all, most of the wizarding community had dismissed both the author and his ideas as utter nonsense. Skeeter, however, could never have foreseen the reaction that followed her article, especially once that candid portrait of Riddle was published by mistake. In an astonishing turnaround, the pureblood families who'd been lining up to condemn and ban the book fell eerily silent, and then became its most enthusiastic champions. Even Dumbledore's staunchest supporters rallied behind Riddle, trusting the headmaster's judgment. Still others were drawn simply by Riddle's striking good looks and the whispered rumors of a scandal between him and Dumbledore. By the time he finally appeared at Hogwarts in person, the students agreed he was far more magnetic live than in any photograph. That surge of excitement only amplified the influence of Lisa Dupin's glowing endorsements. Harry, standing beside Ron in the crowded Great Hall, felt a cold bead of sweat trickle down his temple as whispers and applause washed over them. But to Harry's surprise, Ron looked perfectly calm, almost serene, amid the frenzy. "Professor Riddle?" Harry murmured, his eyes darting to the doorway where Riddle was expected. Ron shook his head with a small, knowing smile. "Not him," he replied softly. "I mean Professor Lupin. He was a friend of my dad's." At lunch in the Great Hall, Ron leaned forward, lowering his voice. "We all know how powerful he is, right? He was even a Gryffindor prefect." He paused to sip his pumpkin juice, as if that one fact alone could prove the man he was describing wasn't Professor Riddle. At once, the hum of nearby conversations died away. Even Lisa Dupin, spoon halfway to her mouth, smacked her lips in regret. Yet Ron looked strangely unsatisfied. Across the table, Dean Thomas sat up straighter. He nudged Seamus Finnegan and whispered, "A prefect in Gryffindor? That's someone we can trust." He grinned. "It also explains why we've got 2 Defense Against the Dark Arts teachers this year. Professor Lupin must be covering for Professor Riddle. Lupin does the actual teaching, and Riddle holds the title. And mark my words, Riddle's probably Dumbledore's son. He only just bought his wand. He likely grew up in the Muggle world." Dean's voice dropped even lower, wary of the first-year girls who developed crushes on Riddle. Seamus pricked his ears at the gossip, but still miffed after his spat with Ron, chose to stay silent. Ron suppressed a laugh, caught Harry's eye, and gave him a conspiratorial nod. Ron couldn't hide a grin. Being let in on a secret that nobody else knew had gone straight to his head. Harry, however, worried that if Dean had been the one clued in, the scandal would be 10 times worse. Oddly enough, he still wanted to sock Ron in the jaw. "What's gotten into me?" he wondered. "It must be Dudley's fault for filling my head with nonsense." He cut through the buzz of chatter at the Gryffindor table and turned his gaze to the Hufflepuffs across the hall, where his cousin sat. He hadn't seen Dudley in months, and now this. "Blimey!" Harry gasped. "Harry, are you all right? What's the matter?" Ron cried, springing to his feet. Ginny and Dean joined him, eyes wide. A few other students turned, curious. "Look, over there!" Harry choked out, voice trembling as he pointed. "That's my cousin Dudley." They followed his gesture. Where they expected to see Dudley's familiar round frame, they instead found a sculpted back of muscular breadth. He stood at the Hufflepuff table, cloak swirling around lean hips and powerful shoulders, hardly the image of the pampered, pudgy boy Harry once knew. "Did he down a shrinking potion?" Ron whispered, astonished. "I've never heard of one that works that fast." Dean studied Dudley suspiciously, brows knit. "Harry, you didn't curse him over the summer, did you?" Harry opened his mouth, ready to deny it, though nobody suspected the real reason behind Dudley's transformation. Harry's unexpected apprenticeship with Draco and the others had taught him more than a few advanced spells. For now, though, he could only shake his head in bewilderment as Dudley's new silhouette caught every eye in the Great Hall. Dean's brow furrowed as he studied Harry. "You really did hex him, didn't you? All that pent-up anger over your cousin, just to get back at him." Harry stared back, incredulous. "What? No, I had nothing to do with Dudley's change." Ron, lounging against a table, chimed in. "Think about it. You spent the whole summer at our place. You must have brewed some elaborate reversal potion, maybe a double negative charm that turned Dudley's biggest flaws into, well, attractiveness. A double negative equals a positive, right?" Dean added with a smirk. "So your curse backfired in the best possible way, and now Dudley's suddenly handsome." Harry ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. "I promise, I didn't cast any curse or potion on him." Ron scratched his chin. "But if it was a magical effect that big, wouldn't the Ministry have spotted it? Unless they can't read your magic like we can." "Are you kidding?" Dean scoffed. "This is Harry Potter we're talking about, the one who beat you-know-who. He's got magic defying every detection spell the Ministry can throw at him." Harry's frustration flared. "Honestly, you two sound like you think I hide everything from you. Just because Dudley or Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia are complete nightmares, you assume I'd stoop to magic for revenge? Dean shrugged. Wouldn't blame you. If it were me, I'd want a little payback too. But the way you're acting, guilty as charged. Ron laughed. Now even I'm convinced you've been sneaking around, adding secret spells to toothpaste or breakfast cereal. Next time, though, Dean grinned, maybe keep your curses away from the, well-fed. Wouldn't want to make them irresistible by mistake. Harry glared at them both, then couldn't help a small, reluctant smile. Fine. You've poked enough fun. I'm telling you, I'm innocent. Ron clapped him on the shoulder. All right, mate, but if we catch a whiff of Dudley's new cologne being enchanted, you owe us both a butterbeer. Harry rolled his eyes but laughed. Deal. Ron's eyes sparkled with excitement. We could have Sirius publish your curse in the Daily Prophet. Call it Fatty Gospel, the amazing magic of the boy who saved everyone. Add Dudley's pictures from last year and the new ones from today. He's practically a celebrity. He's even appeared in the Prophet before. Just imagine how many galleons we'd rake in. Ginny Windshield groaned and pressed her palm to her forehead. Her brother's boundless schemes never ceased to astonish or embarrass her. Harry stared at Ron, dumbfounded. He'd never suspected Ron could spin yet another wild money-making venture out of one of his off-the-cuff ideas. All right, Harry said at last, his tone a mix of amusement and resignation. I'll handle the gobbledygook translation, draft the business plan, and oversee sales. Fred and George have been dying to open a shop. No one's better at inventing magical merchandise. Don't worry, it won't interfere with Quidditch. I'm still captain of the Ravenclaw team, and we need to choose new players this year. Johnny, Dennis, Woody, and Arrow all graduated, so our chaser and keeper positions are wide open. Ron's face fell. Wait, Harry, you're not going to leave me holding the bag on this one, are you? Ginny just shook her head, muttering under her breath. Sometimes, she thought, it was best just to let her brothers run wild and hope the rest of the world could keep up. I swear I didn't hex anything, Harry protested, each word clipped with frustration. Before he could say more, the plates on the table shimmered and returned to spotless perfection, the signal that dinner was over. Dumbledore rose from his seat, his eyes twinkling over the great hall. Well, now that we're all well fed and watered, and I've delivered my little speech before the sorting ceremony, it's quite late. Why? I'll need to be bright-eyed and clear-headed for tomorrow's classes. Off to bed, then. Chop, chop!